what this afternoon is going to look like and how we're going to kind of reshape the class going forward. So as I mentioned before we left for lunch, I'm going to get out of order of the syllabus just a little bit. The syllabus has us doing chapter 10, chapter 11, and then chapter 14. And I'm going to switch it up a bit. So instead of jumping into 11 next, I'm going to skip 11 for now. We'll come back to it. But I'm going to go ahead and jump into chapter 14. The reason being, chapter 14 is our closing disclosure, where we do the math, we do the calculations necessary to help our buyers figure out how much they have to bring to closing and to help our sellers figure out how much we're going to get from closing. Because there is the math with the closing disclosure, I want to do that now to give you guys time to practice and work through it and ask questions to get ready for your exam next Sunday. If I followed the syllabus, we'd probably be doing the CD like next Saturday afternoon. And that doesn't give you much time to think about it before the test the next day, right? So we're going to switch it up. Everybody good with me so far? Is that good reason? We will actually pick our calculators up tomorrow. We got to talk about other stuff in chapter 14 before we get to the calculations. So tomorrow, the big star is going to be our closing disclosure CD. Please bring your calculator tomorrow so we can work on that. And then you guys have all week, like I said, to practice, ask questions, that kind of thing. And then when we're done with that, then we'll come back and get chapter 11 so we can get everything covered. Does anybody have a subscription to the digital manual? Or are you guys all hard book? Sabrina does. The rest of you hard books. So Sabrina, and one more plug to kind of sell the digital manual to you guys. Once you're logged in, you get the subscription and you log on, and you got your little your chapters over here. Those little bars open it up. Just FYI, I love this about the digital manual. They've given you a chapter for 301, 302, and 303. So on the digital, you don't have to wonder what chapters are involved for 302. That's chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12. They put it right there in a nice, neat little package for you. The other thing they've done with this update of the digital version that I really like, they've provided us with the forms. So all the forms, a lot of these we're going to talk about in class. Some of these we won't. But all the forms are available in the digital manual for all the classes, all real estate in general. They provide them here. And again, one thing about this, next week, or not next week, in a couple weeks on July 1st, we know the offer to purchase and contract is going to be revised. Right now, it's July 2022. In a couple weeks, it's going to be July 2023. And a big benefit of the digital manual is they'll be able to update the forms in here. Your hard book, those forms are going to be out of date. So again, luckily this class ends while we're still in July before the forms update, so we can focus on what we have now. But no, when we get done next Sunday, you won't be too far from new forms. And your firms will probably offer training or some kind of education to help make sure that you're getting to change that information. I know my firm already has me scheduled to do new form stuff in July. They went ahead and got me on the calendar, which means I got to figure out what those changes are so I can share that with my agents, but I think I'll be all right. We'll figure it out together. Questions or comments about the manual, the new forms, anything like that? The new edition is available for purchase now. So you can either get it from the commission's website. Where did we say it was? Let's see. Somewhere there's like a store. And you could purchase the hard book right from the commission, or you can call Lane and you can purchase it from her as well. Yep, same price. She doesn't charge you more. So it'd be the same price whether you come from here or not. But somewhere I'm looking, it's going to say, here it is, manual. So yeah, you can either get the printed version, order it here, or you can subscribe to the digital. So it's $50 versus 25. And I'm in publications under North Carolina Real Estate Manual. This, like I said, this just came out like 2 weeks ago. I haven't even had a chance to mark my book up yet. Other questions on that? Thank you. All right. So let's skip ahead, my hard book people. We're going to or about page 459. If you're in the new purple book, it's 459. If you are in the old blue book, dark blue book, it's around there somewhere. And chapter 14 is broken down into a couple different sections. So the first piece of chapter 14 is our closing preparations and procedures. We're pretty much going to walk through the contract to closing process. We refreshed prior to lunch how to form that contract. So now that we have a contract form, let's walk through the process of contract to closing. So in this section, we're going to discuss some general pre-closing procedures. Probably the biggest part of this section is reviewing the buyer's due diligence process, things they should be encouraged to do during this time, their opportunity to learn as much about the property as they possibly can. And then we're going to talk about some different closing methods and kind of how that works in general. So first off, when we talk about this contract to closing process, when I'm working with buyers and sellers, I encourage them to think of the contract to closing process as working gears. So let's give a role to each gear. Let's put the seller and their agent on a gear, and a buyer and their agent on a gear, and the lender gets a gear, the appraiser, the closing attorney, the surveyor, the home inspector, the pest inspector, right? Everybody involved in the contract to closing process gets a gear. What happens if just one of these gears stops? The whole thing stops, doesn't it? Yeah, that's right. The whole thing stops. So guys, a big part of our job is keeping these gears going. Make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, what they need to do within that time frame. Sometimes we have a very short window to have all these inspections and investigations to get the lender's approval, closing attorney to do their thing. There's a lot that goes on. I mean, they call the contract the closing process a process for a reason, because there is a lot that has to happen. And one of the best things that we can do as agents is to help keep these gears going, so settlement can happen as close to the projected date as possible. When we look at our contract, our offer to purchase and contract, we're going to see there's a difference in settlement and closing. Now, we all in this industry, we all do it. You guys will too. We're all in this bad habit of referring to settlement as closing. But the truth is none of us will probably ever attend closing. What we attend, what we have our buyers and sellers go to is actually referred to as settlement. We will see both of these defined when we look at our contract. We'll break them down. Even though we're in the habit of calling it closing, we do need to understand the distinction and that there is a difference. So settlement is when the buyers and sellers turn in their documents. You know, the buyer's going to have loan package. The seller's going to have to sign over their deed and various other documents. So settlement is the buyers and sellers completing their legal documents. And then if they have to bring any funds necessary to complete the transactions, they will do so at settlement. The buyers almost always have to bring money to closing. If the seller's underwater, that means they owe more than the house is worth, and they may have to bring money to closing. It happens sometimes that the seller has to bring money to convey that title. So we just need to make sure that settlement, again, that's what we attend with our clients when they're doing their thing, put their finishing touches on everything. When we leave settlement, when we leave the closing attorney's office, that's when the attorney proceeds with what's actually referred to as closing. And that's why I said, I've never been to closing. Our buyers and sellers, real estate agents, I doubt you guys will ever go to closing. That's the finalization of the legal process with the very last act. The very last thing that the attorney does is record the buyer's new deed. And then, and only then, is it a done deal. Now, we all work really hard. We try really, really hard for settlement and closing to happen on the same day. But do things happen? Do glitches happen? Does the internet go down? Does power go out, right? Things can happen. So there may be things that may delay this between settlement and closing, in which case we'll work through it. We will get through it. So let's talk about some pre-closing procedures. And one common question that you or your buyers or sellers may have is, who's responsible for paying what at closing or settlement? And how do we know how much they have to pay? Well, a lot of the answer to that question can be found in our contract. Our contract spells out various things that each party, buyer and seller, are going to be responsible for paying. If it's not spelled out in the contract, then it may be handled the customary practice. How do we do things in this area? How do we do things in this market? One thing, when we went online, when the pandemic hit, and we all went online, one thing that was a real eye-opener to me is because now my post-licensing classes were open up to anybody, not just in the Winston-Salem area, but to anybody all over the state, and in some cases, all over the country. And it was interesting to me right off the bat to learn, just because this is how we do things in the Triad, may not be this is how they do things in the Triangle or Charlotte or down in Wilmington. So you might just be your local customary practice dictates who's responsible for what. But for the most part, it's going to be spelled out in the contract. Very early on in the transaction, we need to choose our closing attorney. The buyer hires the closing attorney, which means the closing attorney represents the buyer in this transaction. The closing attorney has the best interest of their buyer client. The closing attorney's biggest responsibility, their biggest role in this transaction, is to make sure their buyer client is getting clear marketable title. So the acts that the attorney does, and we'll talk a little bit more about these, such as the title search, for example, and clearing that title. That's all because that's what's in the best interest of their buyer client to ensure that is a marketable title. If the buyer is getting a loan, the lender is part of the buyer, the lender comes with the buyer, and the closing attorney is going to represent both interests, the buyer and their lender. Obviously, if it's a cash buyer, there's no lender around. I think in a typical residential resale, typically, the seller generally allows the buyer's closing attorney to prepare their documents, get their deed ready, that kind of thing. If you start getting into commercial transactions, or you deal with an estate, for example, it's not going to be uncommon for the seller to come with their own attorney. Always remember this, even if it is just a typical residential resale transaction, sellers are always welcome to have their own representation. But I think it's important that we understand who the attorney represents in this transaction to help us better identify that role. And the seller is always welcome to get their own representation if they choose. Once we go under contract, buyer's agents, we go under contract, we get that signed contract, executed contract in our hand. Buyer's agents, one of the first things you're going to want to do is get a copy of that executed contract to the lender. Because hands down, the lending process is the longest part of the contract to closing process. So the sooner we can get the lender started on their thing, the sooner we can get things started in general. We'll talk more about the lender in just a second. Once we send it to the lender, buyer's agents, probably the next thing we're going to want to do is send that executed contract to the closing attorney. Let's go ahead and get settlement on the books for the date that the parties agreed to in the contract. Delays happen. I'll talk about that in just a second. But at least we know the date that we've agreed to, and everybody's working really, really hard to meet that goal. So we can go ahead and get that closing on the books. So we want to send the contract to the closing attorney. And then additionally, any other information that the attorney requires or requests to assist their buyer client in assuring they're getting that clear marketable title, then obviously we want to work with the attorney. I know cases where the attorney reaches out to the seller and asks for a copy of their deed or their title insurance policy for various reasons. The attorney at some point is going to have to get the seller's payoff amounts. Those will be calculated to the penny to the day of settlement. So the attorney is generally in communication with the seller's lenders to get that amount. And then any invoices that are to be paid at closing. Again, this is one of those big eye-opening things for me. Here in the Triad, a lot of our home inspectors allow the buyers to pay for the home inspection at settlement. Now they'll say, if you pay in cash the day of, I'll knock 10% off. But let's face it, guys, a lot of buyers, particularly first-time home buyers, may not have that kind of cash laying around. So they'll make it available, but a lot of them will allow the buyer to pay for that service at settlement. In which case, the home inspector is going to send you the invoice for you to send it to the attorney so it can be put on the closing disclosure so the home inspector can make sure that they're going to get paid. So any invoices that we get throughout the transaction, whether they need to be paid at closing or not, we need to help communication with the attorney to get them that requested documentation, help keep those gears going. As I mentioned, delays just happen. Why could settlement get delayed? Pick a reason. There's a cajillion, anything can happen, right? And delays just happen. We are all working really hard for this date that we agreed to on in the contract, but understand things just happen. As a matter of fact, delays are so common. We actually have a number of day delay built into our offer to purchase and contract. Does anyone remember how many day delay we have built into our contract?
7.
Say it again.
7.
14.
The old one was 14. They changed that on you a couple years ago. Yep, they updated the form. I think that was 21. So that change isn't terribly old. So today they've changed it to a 7-day delay. So what this means, when it comes to delays and settlement, you have a delaying party and a non-delaying party. One party's causing the delay. And the contract specifically says, as long as the non-delaying party is doing everything in their best effort, then we allow for this the delaying party. We allow for this 7-day delay, which means during this 7-day delay, the non-delaying party really can't do anything but sit patiently, fingers crossed, hope that this thing closes in the next 7 days. If they terminate within 7 days, they're in breach. So the name of the game for the delays is just be patient. On day 8, if we still haven't closed, now the non-delaying party has the right to terminate and the delaying party would be in breach. Usually delays, the delaying party is the buyer. And sometimes it could be the seller, but usually the delaying party is the buyer. And the reason why most of the time is we haven't gotten loan approval yet. So again, in that case, the seller's only option is to sit still, be patient, and hope that things work out within that 7 days. On day 8, they can choose to terminate if they wish. starting on page 461, we're going to talk specifically about the buyer's due diligence process. Understanding the buyer has a lot more to do during due diligence than the seller does. So the buyer's due diligence process is just some general responsibilities when we're working with a buyer through their due diligence process. This is whether you're wearing the hat of a buyer's agent or you're acting as a seller sub-agent. So just general responsibilities. We always have a duty to all parties to disclose material facts. We always have to disclose. We always have to disclose material facts. We never have a reason not to disclose material facts. I don't care if you're talking to a client or a customer. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. We always have to act in a competent manner. This is our when in doubt, find out. If you're filling in the blanks of legally binding paperwork for your buyers and sellers, and you don't know what goes in that blank, don't we owe it to our buyers and sellers to find out? Don't we owe it to make sure that that blank is filled in properly? Don't fill something in just for the sake of filling something in. When in doubt, find out. We're going to have a duty to avoid any undisclosed conflict of interest. I think probably one of the biggest conflict of interest is undisclosed dual agency. Remember, dual agency is always intentionally created with informed written consent of both parties. We can't just start acting like a dual agent without creating that dual agency. So duty to avoid undisclosed conflicts of interest. They don't let us have any fun, do they? We got to avoid improper, fraudulent, or dishonest dealing. We never have a reason to lie or to act improperly. We always have to comply with applicable provisions. LL and CR is license, law, and commission rule. So we always have a duty to comply with the commission's license, law, and commission rule. And then we have to treat all third parties fairly, equally, and honestly and fairly. There it is. When we're talking about third parties, we may be talking about, if I'm a buyer's agent, for example, the third party is going to be the seller. They're going to be my customer in the transaction. But keep in mind too, you guys, when we're talking about third parties, this is also dealing with the lender, the attorney, everybody else involved as well. So we can't lie to anybody. So let me ask you guys a question. You've met a buyer, you brought him into your office, and one of the first things you did, obviously, is sit down and do your working with real estate agent disclosure and decide if you're going to proceed as a buyer's agent or seller's agent. So we get through that pretty early, right? Now that we're through those requirements, you're meeting with this buyer for the first time to start talking about them buying a home. What's one of the next very first questions after disclosures that we're going to ask that buyer? Before I start asking how many bedrooms they want, where do they want to live? What do I need to know first?
If they're pre-qualified.
Have you talked to a lender? We have got to make sure that we get this loan process moving. Have you talked to a lender? Have you gotten pre-approved or pre-qualified? We cannot, should not show property to buyers that haven't talked to a lender. You're doing yourself a disservice. Guess what? You're doing them a disservice as well. Why are we out there showing property if we don't even know they can afford it or not? So one of the first things we need to do, again, do your disclosure, do your agency, of course. Then your next question should be, have you talked to a lender? If they have not talked to a lender yet, we have a responsibility to encourage our buyers to shop around. Not all lenders are created equally. They all have different products and different interest rates and different terms and different packages. How does your buyer know that they're getting what's best for them if they don't shop around? So we're never going to look at a buyer and say, this is the lender you're going to use and you're going to like it. Instead, we're always going to give our buyers choices. Here's a list of 2 or 3 lenders that I've used that I recommend talking to. If you're new and you don't have any lenders on your speed dial yet, agents in your firm may have some preferred vendors. You can say, here's some lenders that other agents in my firm have used. But you'll notice in time, you'll start forming relationships with lenders. And when you have good experiences with them, then those are that you can recommend because you had a good experience. If I recommend my buyer talk to, I don't know, 2 lenders, does my buyer have to use either one of those lenders that I recommend? Nah, they can use whoever they want to, can't they? But at least we show that we recommended. Y'all don't send your buyers to Google to look for lenders and other services. This is why they have us, so we can give them our recommendations based off of our previous experience. If the buyer's getting a loan, if they're using a lender, an appraisal is going to be required. Period. End of story. The appraisal is actually the property of the lender. The lender requires the appraisal so they can determine how much loan to value ratio. The lender can determine how they're going to originate the loan. So if a lender's involved, the appraisal is always going to be required. Again, it's the property of the lender. It's a requirement of the lender. The lender lets the buyer pay for it, but it is there so they know how they're originating that loan. If it's a cash buyer, and that cash buyer starts asking you a lot of questions about value, could the cash buyer get an appraisal done? Could we recommend that? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's only required with the lender, but the cash buyer is more than welcome. What about if you're for the seller? Maybe you're getting ready to list a very unique home and you can't find comps. Could having an appraisal done be something to consider for the seller to do before you list it? Absolutely. So the appraisal is not just for the lender, it's for anybody that has questions about value. So the buyer's loan, again, we go under contract, we get that executed contract in our hands. We need to get that to the lender for them to start processing and doing their thing, because their process does take the longest. Also, during the buyer's due diligence, what are other things that the buyer should consider doing as part of their inspections and investigations to learn about as much about the home as they can? One thing they may want to consider is having a survey done. If they're buying something with land, obviously, if they're buying a condo, there's no land. If they're buying a townhome, may not need a survey. So usually we're talking about something with land. The survey not only helps identify the parameters of the property, let the buyer know what it is they're buying, but it's also going to identify things such as encroachments, easements, setbacks, flood zones, etc. If the survey discovers a problem, let's say the survey reveals that there's an encroachment, it is the seller's responsibility to take care of that before settlement. But if we don't have the survey, how can we identify that encroachment for the seller to take care of prior to settlement? I don't know about you guys, but it's been my experience. A lot of my buyers waive the survey. Despite my efforts, despite my attempt, I think a lot of buyers out there, they think they're saving some money. And it's all fine and dandy until a problem arises. How much money did they actually end up saving now that they're dealing with something legality issue that was discovered after closing? We're going to talk about title insurance in just a second. And one thing it's important for our buyers to understand, if you waive the survey, we go to closing, and then something is discovered that would have been found had you had the survey done. We find an encroachment after closing. Title insurance is not going to cover that owner, that buyer. Title insurance is going to say, yes, you should have had the survey done for us to take care of before we went to closing. So another push, another reason to try to get our buyers to have that survey. Unfortunately, surveys are no longer required. They used to be required of the lender, kind of like the appraisal. You just had to do it. And somewhere along the lines, they decided to stop that requirement for the most part. And now it's just highly recommended. And it really does blow my mind how many buyers waive it to save a couple, $400 or $500. It's going to be a much bigger problem when something happens after settlement. Comments on that, on the survey? Also, during due diligence, we need to get our buyers, encourage them to shop around for property insurance. I get mine shopping early on. When we go under contract, I tell my buyers that the lender is their #1 priority. Get the lender what they need so they can get through that first round of underwriting. Once they have satisfied the lender with what they need for now, the next thing we need to do is get our buyers shopping around for property insurance. Not all property, not all people are easily insurable. And if it's going to be that homeowners insurance is going to bump them up over their allowable monthly mortgage payment, their PITI, if it's going to be more than what's allowed, we're not getting loan approval. As a buyer's agent, well, as any agent, I hate to terminate. Nobody likes to terminate. But as a buyer's agent, if we have to terminate, I want to do so within due diligence, because the best thing I can do is get my buyer their earnest money deposit back. So if we can't close, we're not going to get loan approval because insurance is too much. I'd rather know that now than 2 days before settlement. How about you guys? So get them shopping around. And y'all hear me when I say shop around, right? Tell them to talk to a couple different insurance agents, because once again, they're not all created equal. So have them shop around, compare what's the best policy for them and their family. Another thing to consider is if the property is in a flood zone, they may be required to purchase flood insurance. And I'm telling you guys right now, flood insurance is not cheap. So again, if we find out we're not going to get approved because of insurance, we want to know this early on so we can terminate. Kelly, you probably deal with flood insurance a lot down at the Outer Banks, anytime you're near a body of water. So for those of us that aren't lucky enough to be at the beach, for the rest of us, if you see a property that's on a creek or a stream or a river or a lake or a pond, we know what these summer thunderstorms can do, right? It takes nothing for a storm to blow up and that stream becomes a creek, creek becomes a river, rivers become these big gushing mad bodies of water that could cause flooding. The whole point, or throughout the whole process, not just due diligence, but throughout the whole process, the buyer's encouraged to conduct inspections or inquiries, ask questions about the property. When we read the contract in Chapter 11, I mean, it says it's the buyer's opportunity to learn about the property, to decide in their sole discretion if they want to move forward with or terminate the transaction. So in doing their inspections and inquiries, probably the best place for them to start is with the RPOs. The names of some of these forms: Residential Property and Owner Association Disclosure Statement. That's a mouthful, isn't it? You good if I call it RPOs going forward? It's much easier for me to say 20 times. RPOs, RPOs. Okay. So the RPOs, in most markets here in the Triad, most of the time we have the RPOs available as an attachment in MLS before I ever show the property. So if there's something disclosed in the RPOs, if the seller does choose to disclose something, we can have this conversation with the buyer before we ever go see the property. That may make or break whether or not we're going to allow the showing. There's rules that say we have to have it within 3 days of the contract effective date, We'll spell all that out when we look at our contract in Chapter 11. But generally, any disclosed points from the seller will be our first point for inspection. And guys, remember, please always remember, regardless of how the seller completes the RPOs, we as agents always have a duty to disclose material facts. The seller can hide behind caveat emptor. You and I cannot. We have to follow license law and commission law. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. So we've looked at the RPODs, gathered what the seller was willing to disclose, if anything. Some other things the buyer may want to consider inspecting during their due diligence period. We want to encourage the buyer to have a pest inspection. Don't let the name fool you. The pest inspection is not looking for all pests. The pest inspection is looking for those that destroy wood. So we're talking termites, powder post beetles, carpenter bees. The home inspector will identify if they see evidence of other pests, then of course they will note that in their report. But understand the specific pest inspection is looking for wood destroying insects. And they're not necessarily looking for the insects themselves. They're looking for evidence that insects are or were there. You guys know what you're looking at here in this picture? It's kind of creepy, isn't it? These things are termite tunnels. And termites will build these to get from the ground up the foundation to the wood of the home. Maybe they're outside, easy to see. Maybe they're dug way down in the crawl space somewhere. But the termites use these tunnels to get from the ground to the wood. You may or may not see an active termite tunnel, but you know if you see these, termites have been there. The pest inspector knows that termites have been there. I saw an active one of these things once. Never again. I'm good. I'm good. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I hope to never, ever see one again. Ugh. They're out there in the home. These suckers can do some damage, can't they? And fast too. It's amazing. Those carpenter bees, they drill these perfect round holes in the wood. It almost looks like a human put a drill bit on it and drilled that hole. It's amazing how they're perfectly round. If you see sawdust laying around randomly under your deck, something's up. So you may want to start looking around at that.
Julie,
Yeah.
not to mention, like, new builds are not always like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they're not excluded when it comes to termites. I did pest control for 8 years and I've seen a lot
Really?
of stuff. Yeah.
I
So
would
I've
think
seen-
that would be like standard. If I were a builder, I would, you know, but I guess there's no builder requirement to do that. So new construction you ran into,
Mhm.
yikes. That's good to know, Sabrina. Thank you. Pest inspection is only required if your buyer's getting a VA loan. The VA may require certain inspections like the pest inspection. If it's on a septic or a well, they may require septic inspection or well water. We'll talk more about that in a second. Interestingly enough, the VA requires the pest inspection. Very rarely does the VA let the buyer pay for it. So if the buyer's not paying for the pest inspection, who's up? See mouths move? The other party to the transaction is the seller. As a listing agent, isn't that important for your seller to know while they're considering this offer? The pest inspection is probably required, VA, but you're going to have to pay for it. So it's important. We have an FHA VA financing addendum that spells that out for the seller. That's one form of many that we'll look at when we get back to chapter 11. FHA loan, conventional loan, USDA is not required. Highly recommended, but not required. Probably the first inspection I start with personally with my buyers is that home inspection. Let's go ahead and get this thing going, get this thing started. So first off, let's understand the home inspector's job. And let's make sure the buyer understands the home inspector's job. The home inspector's job is to go into the home and find the problems. This report is not going to look nice, is it? Let me just go ahead and put this out here, you guys. Are you ready for something? There is no such thing as a perfect home. All homes have problems. They have issues. They have something wrong with them. And that something wrong with them is the home inspector's job to find. Please prepare your buyer for this. They are not going to get a report from the home inspector telling them what a lovely home they're buying and everything's good to go. it's gonna look bad, yes? And if your buyer doesn't know what to expect, could they get scared? I mean, you get a 40, 50 page home inspection report. A lot of the times why it's so big, 40, 50 pages is nothing, because home inspectors like to use lots of pictures. They like to point to things so you can actually see what's broke, what's worked, what's not, what needs fixed. So prepare your buyers, help educate your buyers for that report. I tend to think of the home inspector as kind of like our general practitioners. We go hopefully to the doctor each year for our annual checkup. Our general practitioners know a little bit about a whole lot of things, right? What does your doctor do if they have a red flag go up, if they have a concern about something?
Run a bunch more tests.
Run a bunch more tests. They may even send you on to a specialist just for that problem. And that's kind of what the home inspector will do. They know a little bit about a whole lot of things. But if they have a red flag go up over the electrical, they're going to encourage your buyer to talk to a certified electrician. If there's a plumbing issue, they want them to talk to a plumber. Maybe it's a general contractor, maybe it's a structural engineer. So one reason why I said I like to do my home inspection early is because I want, if my buyer, it's recommended they talk to a plumber, I want to give my buyer the opportunity to get a plumber out there and look at the issue. Also keep in mind, you guys, the home inspector can't fix stuff. If they walk into a room and flip the light switch and the light doesn't come on, they're not going to run out to their truck and get a light bulb and make sure that the light bulb is not burnt out. They're going to say, I flipped the switch, light didn't come on. I recommend you talk to an electrician. Do we need an electrician to change a light bulb? Goodness, I hope not. But at least they know that when he flipped that switch, nothing happened. Is it something serious? Is it the light bulb? I don't know. He's just pointing out that something's not working the way that it should. Listing agents. When you're under contract and your buyer has scheduled their home inspection, we need to have a conversation with our sellers. The home inspector can't or won't move any of the seller's personal property. So they've started packing, right? They have to move at some point, and they've started packing. And if they've piled boxes and totes in front of the utility closet, the home inspector is not going to move those boxes to get in there and inspect the water heater and the fuse box and that kind of thing. So listing agents, have the conversation with your seller and make sure the major components of the home are accessible to the home inspector so their buyer can get a full inspection report. I had a lady recently in this class tell me that her buyer's home inspector, apparently the garage door opener, the contraption that attaches to the ceiling, you know, and actually drives the garage door, it was unplugged. And the home inspector's report said garage door was inoperable at the time of the inspection. Evidently, they couldn't or wouldn't plug it in to see if it worked. Again, they're not gonna, it's too much of a liability for them to run around touching stuff. Does that make sense? So have that conversation with the seller so they can have the home ready. And then obviously, as we said, that's one thing we definitely want to get done during due diligence. Generally speaking, if there's any requested repairs, that's going to come from the home inspector, or at least start with the home inspection report, depending on if we've talked to an electrician or plumber. Any comments on the home inspection report? Another one of those services, we can make recommendations. Again, here's a list of 2 or 3 home inspectors I've used in the past. You'll form these relationships. There's not much valuable than having a relationship with a home inspector that you can text a quick question to. I cannot put the value on that. So make, you know, get out and about. Now that we're out again, you can go to a lot of your local board of realtor events will also include inspectors and lenders and vendors that you can start forming relationships with. Every time we go in the home, the buyer should be physically looking at the property. looking for various things. This has been my experience. The first time a buyer goes in a home, they have their rose-colored glasses on, don't they? And they're not looking for the problems. They're looking for, does this home meet or make my family dynamics? Can I see us, cooking Sunday breakfast in this kitchen? Can I see us doing Friday night family night in this den? They're going in the home and seeing if it fits for their needs, their family needs. You and I can be a big help in this. Are y'all buying this home? No. So why are we going in there trying to figure out if your family works there or not, if you like it or not? We need to be helping the buyer see the things that they're not seeing. When they're trying to picture their family living there, we need to be looking up for water stains, over for, cracks in the walls or the ceilings. Is there torn carpet? Is there, those are the things that we can look for because they're not seeing it. Their rose-colored glasses are on. I think every time they go in the home, we go under contract, they may want to go back to meet the inspector. Maybe they want to take mom and dad. Maybe they want to look at paint samples, right? Every time they go back into that home during the contract to closing process, those rose-colored glasses come off a little bit more and a little bit more. I think they see things the second time they didn't see the first time. They see things the third time they didn't see the second time. So encouraging your buyer, obviously with you, we can't send our buyer to go into that home without us. It's not their home yet. So encourage the buyer to see the home several times. If there's tenants on the property, a lot of tenants don't like to leave during showings. And maybe it's tenant occupied. Maybe you just walk in the door and they're sitting in the living room. Who knows? But if there's tenants involved, we have may have tenants carrying over. Is the buyer going to buy honoring those existing tenants? Is there existing lease in place? Questions there we can ask. If the tenants are going to carry over to the next owner, we have a form. There's a place in the additional provisions addendum, which is one we'll look at, that addresses the seller getting the tenant information to the buyer and the lease, and are they up to date on their rent payment, that kind of thing. I know we're not surveyors, but we can help the buyers identify easements. I don't know many homes that aren't conveyed without some kind of easement. Do you guys like electricity? Do you like water? Do you like your internet? There's some kind of easement there, right? So helping them identify what kind of easement, unless you are living totally off the grid, which if that's the case, I don't know how you're here on the Zoom call. You got internet somehow. Same thing with encroachments. Again, I'm not a surveyor, but I can eyeball an estimated property line and see if half of the neighbor's garage is over that estimated line. I'm not going to yell, there's an encroachment, but my little red flag is going to go up. I'm going to say, we may have an encroachment. I think you guys should get a survey done. The other thing we can do with our physical inspections is help them look. Has there been recent construction or renovations? If they just built a room to the back of the house, the siding's going to be off just by a little bit, enough that we might look at that and say, well, this looks like it was in the 60s, but this looks like it was 2010 or something, right? It's going to be off just a bit. Encourage us to ask questions. If a room or a home's just been painted, it's pretty easy to walk in and smell that fresh paint, right? So we can see and look and smell and tell sometimes if we've had recent construction or renovations. Do those recent construction or renovations, do they violate zoning or restrictive covenants? Did they have permits pulled when they did these major renovations? Did they violate any zoning or restrictive covenants? A big part of our job, you guys, we are fact finders. So when our little red flag goes up alerting us to something, that's our opportunity to know when to ask questions, when to research, when to investigate, to help our buyers learn about the property during this due diligence time. If the property is not connected to public or community sewer, then it may need or require an on-site septic system. If it's unimproved land, it's bare, It hasn't been plumbed yet. If it's unimproved land, we need to allow time in our due diligence for the buyer to have a perk test done. A perk test will tell us if the land will support an on-site septic system. It'll identify the location that the on-site septic system is going to go. Not all land is going to perk for that on-site septic system. If it is improved and the plumbing and electricity and utilities are already there, if the on-site septic system is already in and being used, we want to encourage our buyer to have a septic inspection done as well as part of their due diligence. Listing agents, this is the voice of experience speaking. Prepare your sellers for that septic inspection, because the only way I know to inspect a septic tank, the septic inspector is going to show up with a backhoe and dig up the yard to get to the septic tank. So prepare your sellers for that. If not, they're going to call you freaking out. Trust me, we live and we learn, don't we? Who remembers how many human heartbeats per bedroom the septic system allows for? See fingers coming up? 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. So the septic permit's going to tell us the number of bedrooms allowed per the septic system, the septic tank, with the idea of 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. Listing agents, do not list a number of bedrooms on a property until you've seen that septic report, that improvement permit. If it's an on-site septic system, we need to get our hands on that permit so we know how many bedrooms to advertise. You may think you have a 4-bedroom house, but if the septic permit says 3, that's all I can advertise. We can only advertise the number of bedrooms per the permit. Have you guys been out showing property yet to a buyer? Advertised a 3-bedroom house with an office, for example, and you're standing in that office going, why in the world? This would make a perfectly good 4th bedroom. Why did they not advertise 4 bedrooms? You know why they have 3 bedrooms in an office? Because the septic permit just says 3. Pay attention when MLS says office, study, bonus room. What the buyers do with it when they buy, I don't know. It's our job just to let them know what that means. 2 human heartbeats. And guys, remember too, when we talk about on-site septic systems, the reason they go by bedrooms, the human heartbeats per bedrooms, because this is all the water that leaves the home. So it's not just bathroom water, it's kitchen water and washing machine water and dishwasher water. You guys with me? All the water that leaves the home that has to run through that septic tank. That's what we're looking at here. If the property is on a well, we'll want to encourage our buyer to have the well water tested. That's conducted through the local health department. Our home inspector may be able to help us with that. Some are certified and qualified to assist in that. So that may be a good place to start. If your buyer has any concern about the quality of water at all, if it's public water and they have questions about the how good that public water is, encourage them to have it tested. I had a buyer once, she bought the city of Thomasville, public water, almost downtown. She said, I'm a nurse, I know public water, I want mine tested. And I thought, well, gee, don't we need to listen to that? Right? Do you guys have filters on your drinking water, your kitchen sink, or your filtered water you're drinking from? Just because it's public water doesn't mean that it's, let's call it clean. So if there's any concern about the quality of water, public or private, our answer is to encourage them to have that tested. Lead-based paint. If the home was built prior to what year?
1978.
1978, the magic year with lead-based paint. Anything built prior to 1978, the buyer should be encouraged to have the lead test or there we go, the paint tested for lead to see if there's any presence of lead-based paint. This is one place, the only place I can ever think of. This is the place that caveat emptor doesn't apply. If the seller knows of the presence of lead, they must disclose that. But guys, keep in mind, nobody can disclose what they don't know. So if the seller's never had it professionally tested, do they have anything to disclose? No, only if they've had it professionally tested. If there's lead, they'll receive reports. Those reports become material they need to provide to the buyer, and they need to disclose that. The other thing about the lead-based paint, we've seen the lead-based paint for sale. We'll see it again in this class, but understand too, there's a lead-based paint for rent as well, especially for tenants moving into a home prior to 1978. Don't they come with children sometimes? You know, lead affects those developing organs, those little bodies. So if the tenant has children, don't they have a right to know about that lead as well? So there's two different versions of the form, one for sale and one for rent. Something else, there's a lot going on during due diligence for the buyer, isn't there? Something else they may want to consider is to have a radon inspection. EPA says any radon level over 4.0 picocuries is considered undesirable. The radon inspection, again, around these parts here in the triad, most of our home inspectors are qualified to test for radon, so we can roll it into the home inspection. If your home inspector, whomever's doing the radon test, they're going to put a contraction in the lowest living level of the home. And what that contraction does is every hour, it takes like a snapshot of the radon level. What's the radon level at 1? What is it at 2, 3, 4? And after 3 or 4 days, they go back and get that little contraction, and it gives them an average. It gives them an average of the time. If the average is over 4.0 picocuries, the EPA suggests a radon mitigation system. The buyer can ask the seller to put a radon mitigation system in. Does the seller have to agree to do it? Do they have to put it in? No, they don't. Listing agents, when this happens, it might be worth a conversation with your seller, because let's talk this through for a second. Buyer has the radon tested, it comes over 4. Buyer asks the seller for a radon mitigation system. Seller says no. Buyer exercises their right to terminate during due diligence, and we go back on the market. As the listing agent, don't I now have a material fact on my hand? Radon's not going to go away on its own. So if it comes back on, we have to disclose. If we know, we have to disclose that radon level. I do think it's worth with this. I think it's worth a conversation with the seller, because again, radon's not going to go away. The next buyer is going to have to deal with it. The buyer after that, the buyer after that. So sometimes it's better just to fix it. And honestly, guys, these mitigation systems are like $1,000. What's $1,000 in the big picture of a home? So I think it's worth a conversation. Again, understanding that's entirely up to the seller, and they do have the right to not do anything at all. But what we can do is try to help keep the deal together and let the seller know it's going to come up again with the next buyer if we don't take care of it now. You may be showing a home to buyers and see a radon mitigation system already in place. So now we can have a conversation with about buyers. I don't know why it's there. Maybe it's there because there was a high radon level report once. Maybe the sellers just put it in, you know, to be cautious. What I do know is I see a radon mitigation system in place. Even if you have one already in place, still have a conversation with your buyers. They may even want to consider still having the radon level tested, because those radon mitigation systems within the pipe that comes out of the house and it pulls the air out of the house up into the atmosphere where the radon belongs anyway, that pipe contains a bunch of little fans. Those fans help pull that radon out of the house and put it out in the atmosphere. but those fans don't last forever. They only last about 5-10 years. So if you don't have the radon tested every once in a while, you don't know if it's working or not. I was with buyers once. We were in the basement. We saw the radon mitigation system. We walked up to it. We had a conversation about it. I mean, we pointed at it, you know, there it is. My buyers opted, what is it, 125, 150 bucks to have the radon level tested. It came back at 6 something, even with the radon mitigation system in place. I called the listing agent called the seller called their radon mitigation guy. The guy came out and guess what? Those fans had stopped working. So he replaced the fans, tested it again, and now we're back down to 2 point something. Had my buyers still not chosen to have that tested, we may be dealing with a high level of radon. So again, it's just worth the conversation. For some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason, there's pockets of Winston-Salem that are just known to have higher level of radons than others. In Winston alone, I've heard of like 12 point something. I had a guy in my last class talk about 20 point something. I said, my gosh, get out of that house now, you know? So that's the problem with radon. You can't see it. You can't smell it. You don't know it's there until you have it tested. Another thing the buyer may want to consider, if the home was built prior to 1978, magic year applies to asbestos as well. So if it was built to 78 and they think they're going to do major renovations, demolition, anything like that after closing, they may want to have the asbestos checked out. Asbestos is just fine as long as it's intact. The problem with asbestos is when it becomes friable. When it becomes friable, those little particles break down, they get into the air. We breathe the air, so we're inhaling those little particles of asbestos. I feel like I'm never saying this word right, but have you guys seen the commercials? If you or someone you love has mesothelioma, is that close enough? That's a big word. That's what we're talking about. That's the byproduct of asbestos. So they have had asbestos exposure. They've breathed in some of these friable particles, and it's now in their lungs. 1978, again, is when we stopped building asbestos. I'm not saying you're not going to find it in anything after 78, but you may want to keep your eye out for it, anything built prior to that. Questions about any of the inspections, investigations? We're just making recommendations, things that we think the buyer should consider. Understanding I can't make anybody do anything, but this is why the buyer has me, is to help them through the process. The other thing I think that we need to remember, this list of things during due diligence is not inclusive. So if there's something your buyer wants inspected or investigated that's not on the list, please do not look at your buyer and say, oh, you don't need to worry about that. That'll be fine. We can't do that, you guys. Another super simple philosophy that I live by, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. So anything they want inspected or investigated, my answer is, okie doke, let's do it. Don't tell them not to worry about it. You're not the one buying this house. So we've had our inspections, we've had our investigations. The buyer probably has a list of things that they want the seller to fix. Can the buyer ask for repairs? Sure. Does the seller have to agree to do any repairs? No. There's no law that says the buyer can't ask. The seller can't terminate because the buyer asked. What the rule does is protect the seller in the event they don't want to do repairs. So we have this list. We ask the seller to consider. They either say, yes, we'll do them, no, we won't, or we'll do some of them, but not all of them. A lot of times the repair negotiations is our round 2. I used to say, prior to this crazy market, we saw repair negotiations a lot. We haven't seen much of that the last few years. They're coming back, don't worry. But prior to repair negotiations, they were a thing. They were very common. I used to say it's easier to get them under contract than it is getting them through the due diligence, the repair negotiations. So you got two separate celebrations here, right? One, you get them under contract, and two, you get the repairs negotiated. Couple things we need to understand about that. If the seller agrees to do any repairs, if they agree to do any repairs, we must have those repairs agreed on in writing and signed while we are still in due diligence. Remember, if your buyer's choosing to go past due diligence, to go beyond due diligence, they've done it with all the knowledge, including the knowledge that the seller has agreed to do repairs. Once the seller signs this acknowledgement, this due diligence repair request, they're now contractually obligated to complete the repairs. So we have to have the agreement in writing and signed while we're still in due diligence. The repairs themselves don't have to be complete until prior to settlement or what other arrangements the parties can agree to. A lot of times that period between due diligence and settlement may be short. We may not have time to get the electrician out to fix the electrical work, for example. So we can come up with some creative solutions. I know one time I had sellers that were willing to do it, pay for it was electrical work, but we couldn't get them out by settlement, and nobody wanted to delay settlement. So what we did is we had the electrician send his his quote. The seller took that money and put it in the closing attorney's escrow account. We went to settlement, deed changed hands, the electrician came out and did their work, and then they sent the bill to the attorney. So we just didn't trust that the seller was going to pay. They actually took it a step further. That eased my buyer's mind because they knew that money was sitting there waiting. You know, some things to take into consideration. If you've ever done a home improvement in your home, we know sometimes we end up spending more money than what we thought. So the buyers were aware that if it went over what was in escrow account, they would be responsible for the rest. My point in sharing that with you guys is just know sometimes we need to make other arrangements, and anything is fine as long as the parties agree to it. And of course, it's legal. I think this is a problem topic in the real world. So again, let's make sure we're good here. The repairs have to be agreed on, signed, and in writing while we're in due diligence. They don't have to be completed until prior to settlement. The buyer always has the right to verify the completion of any agreed upon repairs. So if they want their their home inspector to come back out, they can come back out and verify that it's been done to code. If the property is in an HOA, we want to help our buyers get their hands on any covenants, bylaws, articles of incorporations, any of the documents from the HOA. Remember, I'm a fact finder, which means I help the buyer and seller gather the facts for them to make an informed decision. I cannot interpret documents. So my job is to get them the covenants. Sometimes the seller or the listing agent will make them available as an attachment in MLS. They are always public record. So if they're not in MLS, you can go to that county's GIS and do some research and find them. My job is to help the buyer get them. Once you get them to the buyer, if they have a lot of questions about what does this mean and what are they saying here and I don't understand this, we either need to get them to the HOA or get them to an attorney to interpret them. I cannot interpret these documents. Considering zoning and other government regulations, having conversations with our buyers, knowing what they want to use the property for. If your buyer wants to open a daycare, we need a flag go up, a little red flag to go up to help them check with zoning to make sure they can run a business out of this property. If it's in an HOA, we need to check the covenants to make sure a business is allowed. So again, just having conversations about their use for the property when they buy, we can just help them make sure it's okay. I'm not a mind reader. I'm a lot of things, but one thing I'm not is a mind reader. So if you don't share with me your use, I can't help you look for it. So trying to prompt those conversations. Check in DOT's website. Is there any road project? I mean, for those of you in the triad, have you driven around lately? You don't have to go far without finding road construction, do you? Just because we don't see the equipment doesn't mean something's not planned. Checking DOT will help us know if there's something planned, so we know we're going to see the equipment soon. And probably the new 4-letter word in real estate are schools. These things get tricky. So be careful if you're disclosing the school line or the school boards. Just make sure you've done recent research and it's correct. School lines get redrawn. Areas get redrawn. If your buyer wants to be in a particular school district, we can help them get information about that school district. If your buyer says, I want my kid in a good school district, well, who defines that? I certainly don't as the agent. When it comes to learning schools, I'm a big fan of being the source of the source. So if your buyer wants to live in Forsyth County and they want their kid in a good school, send them to Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board's website and let them do inspections, let them do their own investigation to determine what a good school is. I don't know your kids. I don't know what's best for your kids. I think that falls under the job of the parents, with us pointing them in the right direction. Questions? Okay, let's take a break. So I have 2:14 synchronizing our watches. Let's come back at 2:24. We'll keep going through the buyer's due diligence process. Okay. Welcome back. How we doing? Hanging in there? Good. Good. Let me take attendance. We've worked through the buyer's due diligence. Again, that list isn't inclusive, but I think we've covered a good chunk of things that buyer may want to consider. When we look at our contract in chapter 11, we're going to see a lot of those things are also listed out. So, we don't necessarily have to remember everything. We have that right there in front of us. We could kind of use that as a checklist, as a point for conversation when we're talking to buyers about things they should consider. The contract does help us out with that. So let's switch gears just a bit. Let's go away from the buyer and let's talk about our closing attorney and kind of what their big role and responsibility is in settlement. I remember what we said. The buyer hires the attorney. So the attorney represents the buyer in this transaction. And as the attorney's buyer client, it is the attorney's job to make sure that what they're handing their client is clear marketable title. So we go under contract, we submit that contract to the closing attorney and go ahead and get it scheduled because we're all hoping for the settlement date. And one of the first things that the attorney is going to do is a title search of the property. The attorney is going to do a pretty thorough search of the public records to find things that could negatively affect the legality of that title. The legalities of the seller being able to hand the buyer that clear marketable title. Various things that the attorney can find in the title search. We'll see that next. The attorney's going to the public records. Can't you and I go to the public records? Couldn't we do this title search too if we really wanted to? But if you and I are doing the title search, what good does it mean to anybody? This is why the attorney does it, because not only do they know that can they find the problems, they also know how to correct them. If there are any issues with the title, the attorney will get with the seller to make sure that they're clear as part of that process. Some things that the attorney can find in the title search. Well, like we said, they're looking for that good record of title. Are there any encumbrances on the property, encroachments, for example? They're going to want to see the seller's deed, make sure that it is theirs. Is there a deed of release? A deed of release says the seller's paid it off, for example. So is there any money still owed? Are there liens on the property? If there's money owed on the property through, for example, a lien or a mortgage, the seller will pay that off as part of their proceeds. So in other words, before the seller gets paid, they will pay off any of those outstanding liens. Deed of trust in North Carolina, we're just really fancy. And we call our mortgage the deed of trust. So if there's any, again, outstanding deed of trust, if we haven't seen that deed of release, then the attorney, that notifies the attorney that the seller owes some bank, some lending institution money to pay off that mortgage loan. Are there any judgments, personal liens on the property, easements, and any title defects? Obviously, anything else they find in the process too. Usually, like we said, liens, outstanding loans, that kind of thing. The seller will pay that off as part of their proceeds before settlement. Anything else, if there's issues found, title defects or any issues on the title search, it's just going to be a case by case on how that's handled, on how that's taken care of. It might be the attorney and the seller need to submit a form to somebody to get that taken care of. I think in some more extreme situations, the attorney and the seller may need to go stand in front of a judge and ask the judge to quiet the title. Ask the judge to do whatever they need to do to make it right. But again, bottom line, that is the biggest responsibility that the attorney has to their buyer client, is to make sure they're getting that clear marketable title. So they're the ones, even though we have access to it as well, they're the ones that get to do that thorough title search and to help clear up anything. So anything found on the title It's got to be taken care of. It's got to be cured by the seller prior to settlement. Something else that may not even be there yet. Y'all remember that mechanics lien? So what if, here's the what ifs, right? Well, first off, does anybody remember how many days after the work is complete, the mechanic has to file the lien?
Is it 90 or 120? Something like that?
120, yep. I'm all about testing you guys. Good job. So the mechanic has 120 days after the work's complete to file the lien. So let's talk about a situation, a possible scenario. The buyer asks the sellers to do repairs. The seller says, yeah, sure, we'll do those repairs. They do the repair. They never pay the mechanic. We go to closing. After closing, the mechanic files the lien because they have 120 days, right? When the mechanic files the lien, that's a specific question, a specific lien. A specific lien attaches to what?
It's a person, right? Not a
Not the
property.
specific. It attaches to the
Property.
property. It's specific to 123 Main Street. So your buyer, which at this point, we need to call him the new owner, don't we? So the new owner unsuspectingly has a lien placed on the property for the repairs that the seller agreed to fix. Gee, thanks. What about another situation? The seller does repairs before they list. Maybe they have the porch painted and landscape done, try to get that curb appeal. If they do work before they list, this is where when you and I are listing it, we should be able to ask some questions. Wow, your landscaping looks nice. Did you have that done? And if so, did you pay that bill? Sometimes I would put that a little nicer, but sometimes we have to ask those hard questions. So what if? What if? Do people lie sometimes? Can sellers look you in the eyeball and flat out lie to you sometimes? Unfortunately, yes. So we can ask all day long, but there is still no guarantee that they've paid the lien. So what if? One thing that the title insurance company requires, the title insurance company requires the seller to sign an affidavit saying this isn't going to happen. The title insurance requires the seller to sign that affidavit saying all of my mechanics have been paid. There's nothing outstanding. This can't happen. So if it does happen, the seller's already signed something, title insurance will step in and they will go after the seller. So we have those protocols, those systems put in place. Back to that repair request. Buyer's agents, one thing we can do, another thing we can do to protect our buyers. When we're submitting the repair request, we can ask to see completed paid in full invoices. So if the seller says, I'm going to fix this and this and this, we can request to see those paid in full invoices. Doesn't that tell us the mechanic's been paid? And the other thing I like about that, if it breaks 2 weeks after the buyer closes, they know who to call. They know who just did the work. Make sure you're putting that specific verbiage in, because our contract says that repairs are to be made in a good and workmanlike manner. Well, who defines that? We can all run out, buy a hammer and have access to YouTube, right? Does that make us all handymen? No, we all wait. Have you seen those handyman special homes yet? Oh, y'all wait. You're going to walk in the door and wonder if 11-year-old did the work. And it might be that they did. I don't know. You'll see them. They're out there. So in other words, we can just take things in place as a buyer's agent, request a certified electrician to do the work. And when the work is done, I want to see that paid in full invoice. But if it gets past all of us, then that's why the buyer has title insurance. Talking more about that in just a second. Non-urgent question just came in, but it is a good question. You don't have page numbers on the digital manual yet. The commission says that's coming. So right now we're just I'm going in order of the unit. So unfortunately, you gotta keep up with me if you're on the digital. Probably by the time you're done with post is when they'll get page numbers in. So I guess to answer your question, no. But they say they're working on it. As we said, if the seller has a tenant in place with a valid lease, the buyer buys honoring that existing lease and that existing tenant. So part of the buyer's due diligence should be to review the leases. Again, we have a form for that. It's our additional provisions addendum. And that's one that we will look at when we go back to chapter 11. But there's a section in there, there's verbiage in there for the seller to release leases, current status of financials. So is the tenant or are the tenants up to date on rent? Are they delinquent in any way? The seller should be willing to provide all that. Something else in this case that the closing attorney will assist in is drafting up a new lease from the old landlord to the new landlord. This would constitute as an assignment. Remember, with an assignment, you're just transferring your rights and responsibilities to somebody else. So what I'm telling you in an assignment, the terms are going to stay the same. The only thing that changes is the name of one of the parties. So we're going to change the name of the landlords pretty much, right? From the seller's name to the soon to be new owner's name, new landlord. But again, we have an attorney involved by this point. They can help create a new lease for the new landlord and their tenant. Another thing that buyer and seller landlords need to determine is how we're going to transfer the tenant security deposit. So the seller probably has the tenant's security deposit in an account. When the tenant becomes the buyer's, when that deed changes hands and we have a new landlord, somehow we got to get that tenant security deposit to the new owner. So there's one of two ways that can happen. Buyer and seller just need to come to an agreement on that. And it's covered under the additional provisions addendum as well. But they either agree to allow the attorney transfer those funds at settlement. So that's would show up as a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. So we just transfer those funds as settlement. Or the other option, which I think the less used option, would be to return the security deposit to the tenant and then let the new landlord try to collect it from the tenant once that deed changes hands. Did that just give you a little bit of a headache as a buyer that's buying with a tenant in place? You think that's going to be easy to do? So I think what happens the most often, the cleanest, easiest way for this is to let the attorney transfer that from the parties at settlement. As we get closer and closer to settlement, we're talking about pre-closing matters. So by this point, we're right about there. And one thing that we need to consider as we get closer and closer, if your real estate firm is acting as the escrow agent, we need to get that earnest money from the firm to the closing attorney. So first off, let me ask you this. How many of your firms hold earnest money? Yeah, not a one of us. A lot of real estate firms are doing away with holding the earnest money because it's a huge liability. It's a huge risk. So how do we alleviate our risk? We transferred that over to the closing attorney. The closing attorney has to have an escrow account because it's the attorney's escrow account that they distribute the proceeds of the sale. So you and I get paid, the seller, the lender, the attorney, the home inspector, everybody gets paid after closing through the attorney's closing account. So because that's how they distribute the proceeds, they have to have an escrow account. At one point, real estate firms decided, well, if they have to have it anyway, then we're just going to let them deal with it. So for all of us on this call right now, as long as you're with your current firm, if your firm doesn't handle earnest money, you don't need to worry about this after post-licensing 302. Is that good news? If your firm does have an escrow account, or if you later join a firm that does have an escrow account, obviously part of your new agent onboarding is going to be going over the firm's policy on how they want you to handle the earnest money deposit. But what we're seeing is most of us, if you're property management, you got an escrow account. but none of us are. So for us, like I said, we get you through 302 and you don't have to worry about this anymore. If the real estate firm has the earnest money, commission rule says that we cannot deliver it from the firm to the closing attorney no earlier than 10 business days prior to settlement. At some point, we're going to cut a check, and that check needs to be delivered from the firm to the attorney. The agent usually delivers that. Commission rule says we can't do it 10 days earlier prior to settlement. How we get the money, I've just given the example of a check. How we get the money to them, sending a check is one of two ways. So they either take the check to the settlement agent, take it to the closing attorney. When that attorney is processing settlement, they need all of the funds for the transaction. So that would include the earnest money. Obviously, if the closing attorney has the earnest money, it's already there and there's nothing to deliver. So this is why this is only if the firm's holding it. So either the broker takes the check, or what we're seeing most common, most often, instead of taking a check with you to closing, instead we're going to deduct the earnest money deposit from your commission. So hang on, I'm going to get you paid, don't worry. But instead of getting your full commission for, pick a number, $6,000, your commission check from the attorney is going to be $6,000 less whatever the earnest money amount is. So let's look at a visual. Let's say our earnest money is $2,000 and your commission for the whole thing is $6,000. Whoops. So what I'm telling you guys, if we're not going to take a check, you're owed $6,000 commission, but you get the call from the attorney that we're on record. You go back to the attorney's office to pick up your firm's check. And instead of your check to the firm being for $2,000, it's going to be for $4,000. How much commission did the seller agree to pay? $6,000, right? It's just how it's distributed. So we're still going to have this debited from the seller at settlement. This is part of the fun with CD math we get to do tomorrow when we look at that. Now you guys, as the real estate agent, you take a check back to your firm for $4,000, and then your firm transfers the earnest money from their escrow to their operating account. So how much commission did you end up getting? You get your full commission. It's just how we're handling it. This second way is a lot more popular now because there's fewer hands that have to touch it. Remember, it's such a liability. The fewer hands that touch it, the better secured it is. When you go pick that check up, you're going to get nervous. You're going to get excited. You're going to say, where's all my commission? It's there. It's just how they're choosing to distribute that money. We're still going to charge the seller $6,000. That doesn't change. And again, we'll see how that's spelled out when we look at our closing disclosure tomorrow. Questions on that? The attorney, as we said, is the one that does the title search. Once the attorney has conducted the title search and has verified that it's clear title, the attorney is the one that orders the title insurance. The attorney is the one that gives the title insurance company the thumbs up. The attorney is the one that says, I have researched this title. If I found anything, I fixed it. And I'm telling you what I'm handing our buyer client is clear marketable title. So the attorney arranges for title insurance. That period of time between settlement and closing, the attorney does the big thorough search shortly after we go under contract. Now fast forward to that period of time between settlement and closing. They'll probably do one more quick search just to make sure nothing hit the title from when they did the thorough one a few weeks or a few months ago. And upon satisfaction between settlement and closing, upon satisfaction of that title, the attorney is the one that will arrange for the title insurance. There are two policies if a lender's involved. So there's a policy for the owner and there's a policy for the lender. The owner's policy covers them for as long as they own the property. The lender's policy covers them for as long as there's a loan. If you pay that loan off, the lender no longer has an interest in the property. I need to make sure you guys hear me. I need to make sure you understand. Today, they are the buyer. Tomorrow, they are the owner. Title insurance is covering the current owner. So when we see owner's policy, we know that that deed has changed hand, the buyer's new policy is kicked in, and our new owner will be covered under title insurance for as long as they own the property. I think sometimes on the test, you guys, for the closing disclosure on your exam, you're going to see owner's policy, and we tend to think it's the seller. But the seller's not originating a new policy, the seller's terminating theirs. Does this make sense? So today they're the buyer, title insurance kicks in, now they're the owner. So just make sure we're clear on that. Title insurance protects the owner from errors of the past. So remember that shady seller that lied to you about mechanics, and then the mechanic lien came and filed they signed the affidavit, and then they came afterwards and filed the lien. That's what title insurance is there for. So I know all the what ifs we have rattling through our brains. That's why the owner has title insurance. When they go to sell and this mechanic lien pops up, their title insurance will take care of it. Errors of the past. They're not going to issue title insurance, though, until they have that opinion of title from the attorney minutes before they record that new deed. That's why they need to do that one last quick search. Once you and I leave the attorney's office, that one last quick search just to make sure nothing else hit the title, nothing else came up. Now we're a day or two away from settlement. We're getting so close. At some point, buyer's agents, we need to notify our buyer of how much money they need to take. Now we're going to talk about the closing disclosure. We're going to talk about lender requirements. The lender is not telling the buyer how much money they need for closing. The lender is sharing their closing disclosure. You and I have to review that closing disclosure as well. And we are the ones that notify the buyer to the penny how much money they need to take with them to settlement. That money needs to be readily available funds. I'm talking cashier's check, wire transfer. They cannot take a personal check. Remember, we said we're trying really hard for settlement and closing to all happen on the same day. If they take a personal check to settlement, we got to wait 5 to 7 business days for that check to make sure it's cleared the bank before we can close. Does anybody want to do that? So readily available funds, cashier's check or wire transfer, which one the buyer does may come down to the attorney's preference. So if you're not familiar with this attorney, if you don't know how they act, call them and ask, do you guys prefer a cashier's check or a wire transfer? I'm getting ready to send my buyer to the bank to get their funds for closing. If your seller has to bring money to closing, if they're underwater and they owe, they too will need to bring readily available funds to settlement so the attorney has everything together. So listing agents, hopefully you had this conversation with your seller back in the day when you listed it. That's covered on our listing agreement for a reason. Hopefully, if you knew when you listed it, it was underwater, you also knew that they could afford to close. I cannot imagine the day of settlement, your seller saying, I don't have any money. I can't bring anything to closing. We're in breach. Ouch. And all that could have been avoided had we had the conversation when we listed the home. To make sure we know all secrets before we do all that work for nothing. I believe I would cry. I think that would do it. The lender sends their loan package to the attorney along with instructions on how they want it handled, how do they want it completed, how do they want it signed. The lender tells the attorney how to handle their loan package. So the attorney is acting under instructions from the lender. Once the buyer signs the loan package at settlement, again, that period of time between settlement and closing, buyer signs the loan package. Once that loan package is signed, the attorney sends the loan package back to the lender for them to review, for them to make sure everything was signed according to their instructions, everything's been initialed and dated, and the T's have been crossed and the I's have been dotted. Upon review, upon approval of the final loan package is when the lender will release their funds. That's when the lender will send the loan amount once they've reviewed their loan closing package. So it's important that the attorney follow their instructions so we make sure we get that approval so we can get the money. The buyer can't close without that money. And where we're heading, what we're going to spend most of tomorrow talking about is our duty to review those closing disclosures, why we need to review them, the importance of accuracy, making sure as best as we can tell, everybody's numbers are accurate, both what the buyer's supposed to pay and what hopefully the seller's going to get. We go to closing or settlement, the deed changes hands. Once that deed is recorded, you get an email from the attorney. It's my favorite email in this industry. It's short, sweet, and to the point. The attorney will email you and say, "We are on record." You know what that means? Go get your money. Go get your check. Give that key to the buyer. It is a done deal. We are on record. Questions? Contract to closing process. So there's a couple different methods, a couple different types of closing methods. North Carolina uses one type. Let's talk about other types first. Other states, I don't know what state, but other states may use an escrow closing method. They don't use attorneys. As a matter of fact, North Carolina is rare. We are one of few states that uses closing attorneys. Most states use an escrow closing method in which they use an escrow agent, generally from the title insurance company. The parties may or may not attend. They just send their stuff in and let the escrow agent process it, handle it, record the deed, and then it's a done deal. These states have something called a relation back doctrine. And all that's saying is that the seller's deed has been delivered when they take it to the escrow agent, not necessarily when the buyer gets it, but when they deliver that deed to the escrow agent, that is when the seller has delivered their deed for the buyer, the escrow agent's acting on behalf of. Kelly, I see you're shaking your head. Is this how you guys do it in Texas?
We do a title closing. We have title
closing?
offices that do it.
Yep.
because
Did it kind of blow
they
your
don't-
mind a little bit when we said we use attorneys?
Well,
say-
I'm from North Carolina, so I'm
Okay.
used.
Gotcha, gotcha.
But
I
yeah,
know a
they
lot
use,
of times the first time people hear that, they're like, attorneys, yeah.
yeah, they normally don't they don't file the deeds for 2 to 3 weeks sometimes.
And that's exactly, and that's where that relation back doctrine comes into place. Just because they don't file it for a couple weeks, it's been considered delivered to the buyer when the escrow agent receives it. So they have that doctrine for that date and time stamp. So if North Carolina is not an escrow closing method state, as we just alluded to, what are we? We are considered a settlement meeting method state in which our closings are conducted by an attorney. The attorney communicates with the title agent. The attorney communicates with the title company. Again, guys, we're rare in this. Most states don't use attorneys. And I think why this is important for me and you, there's a really good chance in your real estate career, you're going to help a buyer buy from another state. And if they're familiar with their state, they're going to look at you and say, I have to hire an attorney? Are you kidding me? And our answer to that is, if the property is located in the state of North Carolina, do they have to hire an attorney? Yes, because we are a settlement meeting method. So as soon as you start, you get a referral from Kelly for her buyers in Texas that are moving to Winston-Salem. I'm trying to get your referral fee. Then you can then you can go ahead and be prepared to explain to them that we are a settlement meeting method state. We do use closing attorneys. It's not uncommon for non-lawyers to have roles in closings. An example of a non-lawyer would be the attorney's paralegal. The paralegals can do a lot to assist in the closing transaction. They are acting on behalf of the attorney. The thing to keep in mind is they are not attorneys. So the paralegal can do some things, but as far as preparing the legal documents, for example, they can't do that because they're not current members, active members of the North Carolina Bar Association. So some things that our paralegals, our non-lawyers can do. They can present and identify documents. They can show the parties where to sign. The paralegal can conduct settlement as long as the documents were prepared by the attorney. They can stand there and point and say, sign here, date here, initial there. Once they are signed, they can make sure that the documents have been properly executed. They can receive and disperse closing funds. So they can cut the checks to pay the agents and the lender and the home inspector. They do need to be careful to make sure they're not performing unlawful practice of law. Again, the paralegal is helping the attorney. The attorney is the one with the law degree. The attorney is the one is that member of the North Carolina Bar Association. They cannot offer their opinion of title. Offering opinion of title is an attorney's job. They cannot explain or interpret legalities of anything, of title of any documents. Again, that's the attorney's job. The attorney is the one that advises parties how to take title. For example, if you're helping a couple buy and they're not married, we know they can't buy Tennessee by the entirety, right? That's set aside just for married couples. So if they're unmarried, they're going to have to buy either tenants in common or joint tenancy. You and I or the paralegal can't have that conversation about how they should take title. You and I are not expected to whip out our pre-licensing textbooks and say, this is joint tenancy versus tenants in common. Do you feel in some ways we taught you just enough to be dangerous? And I do, I feel that. So just make sure that you and I or the paralegal are not offering that advice. That's the job for the closing attorney. And nobody can draft. We cannot draft. The paralegals can't draft. Turn with me. I just like to point this out. Turn with me to page 472. 472, my digital people. This is in the section under settlement meeting method. Just kind of scroll down. 472 talks about closing coordinated by the real estate broker. There are some things that we can do in settlement, not all things, but there are some things that we can do in settlement. With that being said, make sure you look at that big bold. Brokers are strongly discouraged from attempting to act as a settlement agent. One acting as a settlement agent will be held strictly accountable by the Real Estate Commission for assuring that all aspects of the closing are handled properly and that the broker uses an attorney to perform all closing functions that require a law license. This is one of these things, you guys, let's just let the attorney do their job. We may want to be involved. We may want to help with settlement, getting it ready for settlement. I don't even understand why this is here, but it is. So that tells me there's been issues with this in the past. So let's just all agree right now, we're going to let the attorney do their job and we're not going to get involved in settlement except for, scheduling it and getting our people there. Everybody agree? Fair enough. If you do want to be part of this process, know that you will be held strictly liable. Settlement meeting procedures. Who attends settlement? Well, we almost always have to have the buyer there. The buyer will almost always need to attend. There may be in an extreme situation where the attorney and the lender will allow the buyer to do what's called a mail away closing, in which we can send their closing package, let them get in front of a notary, sign it, and overnight it back. But again, that's going to be more the rare than the norm, and it's got to be approved by the attorney and the lender. I had a situation a couple years ago. My buyers, when I met them, were active military. When I say I met them, this all happened online. And when I met them, she was currently stationed in Italy and he was currently stationed in Japan. I was showing them property by taking my phone, taking videos of homes, sending them the videos. You guys think about this. We operated over 3 different time zones, like big changes in time zones. So I was taking video, they were looking at it, deciding yay or nay. We found the one, went under contract. Luckily, they got a leave and they were both able to come stateside and see that home while we were in due diligence. I think that was the first time I exhaled that entire transaction. So that was a huge relief of me that they got to see it. After that, she was stationed stateside. She got to leave Italy and she's now stationed in Maryland. He went back to Japan. So she had power of attorney, full power of attorney, to sign the settlement paperwork on his behalf because he was in Japan. She's in Maryland. Guess what? The day before settlement, her sergeant said, no, you can't go to North Carolina. What can I do about that? Like, I'm legitimately asking you guys, what could we have done about it, right? This is out of our control. In that case, would you consider that an extreme circumstance? In that case, they allowed them to do a mail away closing. They sent her the paperwork. She printed them out with very strict instructions. There was a notary on base. So she was able to do things on base, sign on both of them. She overnighted them, FedExed them overnight. We had them the next day to do settlement. Kelly, did you have a thought? No. So usually we need the buyers to attend. Again, extreme circumstances, lender and attorney have to approve it. If your buyers attend, buyers agents, we need to attend settlement with them. Haven't we been with them since day one? Why are we going to bail on them now? You know, so you and I are there. Take your laptop or your tablet in case there's questions that come up from the contract or any of the contract paperwork. You can easily access that, to pull it up, answer questions. If nothing else, buyers agents, you're kind of the reassuring face. Has anybody bought a house ever? Few of you? It's a process, isn't it? It's a little nerve-wracking, especially when you're about to sit down and sign that paperwork committing you to a lender for 30 years. I mean, right? This is a big deal. So sometimes just being that calm, comforting, reassuring face, it helps the buyers. Sellers may or may not attend settlement. It's been my experience that sellers are either over it and they're done, or they want to see this thing to the very end. So if the seller attends settlement to sign their paperwork, their agent should be with them. Otherwise, the sellers will have their paperwork ahead of time in which they can sign it in front of a notary, and then the listing agent will have to deliver it in time for settlement. If you're using a local lender, the local lender may come just to offer support or be available to answer questions from the buyer as well. So you may have that surprise visit. And then as far as the location, where settlement happens really doesn't matter. They say it's up to the buyer, kind of up to the buyer and the attorney. Most of the time it happens at the attorney's office, but I've done settlement at the conference room at the real estate firm. There was an attorney in Greensboro. I'm not sure if she's still in the business or not, but there was an attorney in Greensboro that worked from home. So settlement happened at her dining room table. So where settlement happens doesn't really matter, as long as we have the documents prepared by an attorney and everybody make sure they're properly executing. And then the review of documents, again, the attorney, for those of you that bought a house in the last 10, 12 years, your stack of paperwork for buyers looks about this thick, right? They plop a big ream of paper down in front of you. I always tell my buyers to get their signing hand warmed up, because that's pretty much all they're doing for 45 minutes. Sign, sign, sign. They're going to be cramped by the time they're done. Sellers' paperworks aren't near as big. They don't have near as much to sign, but they still have their documents that the attorney will prepare for them. And then we have something called the North Carolina Good Funds Settlement Act. This is for the attorney to make sure that the funding is there. We have to have the proceeds of the sale to pay the parties, me and you, lender, attorney, etc. But this is also the act that says we're not going to get paid actually until it closes. They cannot release funds at settlement. So please do not go to settlement and ask the attorney, when am I going to get paid? You know you're going to get paid when it closes. All attorneys are different, you guys. Some will close after each settlement. Some do it in batches throughout the day. They might do it right before lunch and then again right before they go home at 5. But just again, if you're not familiar with this attorney, just ask, how long after settlement do you record? Do you have an idea about when your check will be ready? And you can go back and pick it up. Again, just that period of time between settlement and closing. The attorney's going to do that quick title update, record any necessary documents. The attorney needs to make sure that everything's recorded in order, like the date, the timestamp have to tell a story, if you will. So before we can record the buyer's new deed, the attorney needs to record the deed of release for the seller's liens. So once they pay off the seller's mortgage, they do a deed of release, and then they record the buyer's new deed. But that timestamp has got to line up. Funds disbursement, once that deed's recorded, they can disperse the funds to pay agents, themselves, lender, etc. When you sell a home in North Carolina, there's a income tax report. I think it's a 1099-S. So the attorney will prepare the 1099-S for the seller for the sale of their home. And generally, the attorney will send that to the IRS as well. Not saying that we don't trust sellers to do it after settlement, but just in case they forget, the attorney handles that for them. Listing agents and buyer's agents, encourage your buyers and sellers to talk to an accountant the year they sell and the year they buy. Have them talk to an accountant so they can make sure they're taking advantage of the various tax programs, tax deductions out there for selling and buying. Again, if you're not an accountant, if you're not a CPA, if you're not familiar with the current tax codes and laws, we cannot be giving accounting advice. Just because you may do TurboTax once a year does not make you a tax expert. So have them talk to that accountant. Is anybody a CPA, by the way? Is anybody an accountant? No? Okay. I like to ask. Sometimes I get one. So that gets us through contract to closing. It's a process, isn't it? We don't call it a process for nothing. Any questions about the process? The next section of chapter 14 starts on page on or about 475. Again, my digital people, you have a section called Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, RESPA. We're going to talk about RESPA. We're going to talk about TRID. We're not going to talk much about TILA in this class other than just to mention it. TILA is in, I think it's 301. You guys will spend a little bit more time. Mary Ellie says, yep, okay. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on TILA. and 301. So 302 is just focusing on RESPA and TRID. So in this section, we're going to define and discuss RESPA and then the combination of the two, what is TRID. So bear with me just 1 second. I got a little video I want to show you guys, and I apologize. I forgot it was coming up, so I'm not prepared, but it'll be in just a second. This video just kind of gives us an introduction to TRID. And then, of course, once we watch the video, we will talk about it a little bit more in this section. So there's that. Let me come back and get you guys. Start the video. And if y'all will give me a thumbs up when I start it that you can hear it. Just to make sure.
What is TRID?
Did you hear that? Okay. All right. Oh dear. Where'd it go? Got a little click happy. It's hard when you got 8 people staring at you. Okay, here we go.
So, what is TRID? Well, let's start at the beginning. Whoa. That's too far. Let's start in 1968. That's when Congress passed the Truth in Lending Act to help promote the informed use of credit. The Federal Reserve was charged with implementing the act, so it introduced Regulation Z, which required lenders to issue a good faith estimate, also called a GFE, and a Truth in Lending Statement, also called the TIL, to loan applicants. Fast forward. Wait, that's too far. In 1974, Congress passed the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, known as RESPA, to add transparency to the cost of settlement services. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, also called HUD, was charged with overseeing the new regulations, so it issued Regulation X, which required a HUD-1 settlement statement at the close of real estate transactions. Fast forward once more a few decades and you'll see the economic crash of 2008 and the subsequent housing collapse. Then, in 2010, Congress passed Dodd-Frank, which created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, also called the CFPB. This group was charged with integrating disclosures under TILA and RESPA. That brings us to October 2015, when a 1,888-page CFPB rule is effective that gets rid of the TILA, says so long to the GFE, bids farewell to the HUD-1, and introduces 2 new shiny disclosures called the loan estimate and the closing disclosure. Well, those 2 little forms mean a whole lot of change for the real estate industry, and it's not just affecting lenders. Home builders, real estate agents, escrow professionals, and title agents are all in the same boat. TILA-RESPA Integrated Disclosures, or TRID, requires a lot of time and resources dedicated to preparing for process and software changes. Here at First American, we're ready to make this transition as seamless as possible for our customers. We're engaging with lenders, retooling our technologies, reorganizing our processes, and training our people to ensure that they know how to keep customers and transactions on course. Make sure you're keeping up with the times. Call your First American representative to find out how we can help keep your business and transactions on track. So, what is...
Okay, so just a little plug there. I don't know what that is. So again, just a little introduction. We're going to talk about those things as well, but kind of give us a idea of where we are, the history, where we came from, and how we are today. So when we talk about TRID, you know, real estate is the industry of acronyms, right? If we can make an acronym out of it, by golly, we're going to. And TRID is like the acronym of acronyms, because TRID is an acronym within an acronym. So what does TRID stand for? Well, TRID is the TILA-RESPA Integrated Disclosure. TILA is an acronym for the Truth in Lending Act. RESPA is an acronym for the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. So what TRID did was it took TILA, it took RESPA, and it integrated them, it combined them. Did you guys catch from the video, not necessarily specific years? TILA's been around for a long time, right? RESPA's been around for a long time. These are nothing new. What's new is the integration of the two. What's new is the consolidation of the two. Both do separate things, but quite frankly, bottom line, they look very similar. And to the consumer, sometimes they were signing and what they thought in their minds were duplicate documents. They're looking at a TILA form and they're looking at a RESPA form going, I just signed this. So to the consumer, it was quite confusing. And one way we thought, or they thought, that they could eliminate confusion was to integrate the two. When you guys see TILA, I want you to see the word lending. Because when we talk about TILA, we're informing the consumer about the cost to get the loan. We're educating the consumer. If you get this loan, how much is it going to cost you? When we see RESPA, I want you guys to see the word settlement. Because specifically what RESPA tells the consumer is the cost to close. So again, they do two different things, but they work together. And today they're integrated under this TRID. So we'll come back to TRID. We'll spend a little bit more time on that. But what we're going to do, starting on page 475, is focus on RESPA, on the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, and the few things that RESPA does to protect the consumer. So it was enacted by Congress. It's all about consumer protection. TRID is all about protecting the consumer. You may or may not have been familiar in real estate, what was going on late 08, 09, 2010. We were going through the housing market crash. And in real estate in that time, 12, 13 years ago, it was tough times. And with the housing market crash, there are a cajillion theories about what went wrong, what caused the housing market crash. And while we're not getting into all those theories, one of the more popular theories was fraudulent lending practices. So the big reason we have TRID today is to help regulate and keep restrictions on those lenders. Now, please don't misunderstand. Not all lenders are bad. Not all lenders were doing things fraudulently. But however, apparently there was enough out there that they're part to blame for something referred to as the housing market crash. I mean, it was, pretty big, obviously widespread nationwide. Understand too, as we talk about RESPA and TRID, as we head into this conversation on closing, when we talk about RESPA protecting the consumer, please understand the consumer in this transaction is the buyer because they are the ones originating a new loan. So in this transaction, it's not about protecting the seller. The seller's protected as a borrower in their own transaction. But in this transaction, the consumer that we're protecting is the buyer because they're the ones getting the new loan. RESPA comes from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau under the Dodd-Frank Act. Again, a little bit of history. RESPA doesn't apply to all mortgage loans. RESPA only applies to mortgage loans for 1 to 4 family residence lots or mobile homes. We'll see anything more than 5 units is not covered under RESPA. RESPA is for those lenders whose deposits are insured, which for mortgage loans are going to be the lenders we deal with, whether they're issuing a conventional loan, FHA, VA, USDA, those lenders' deposits are insured. And you may sometimes hear RESPA referred to as Regulation X. So Regulation X is RESPA. Anybody remember what TILA's regulation is? I love seeing all your mouths move. Yeah.
Z.
Yeah. Yep. TILA is Regulation Z. So RESPA is X, TILA is Z. So if this is what RESPA does apply to, let's make sure we're good on what RESPA does not. Anything more than 4 units. RESPA doesn't get involved in commercial lending. They don't get involved in business lending, and they don't get involved with agricultural loans. So it's residential. always keep in mind, TRID is a lender law. So it only applies when the buyer's getting a loan. If it's a cash buyer, the rule is there are no rules. It's kind of a free-for-all. The attorney can do whatever they want to. I've done one cash buyer in my career, and I felt throughout the entire process that something was missing. And you know what? As a matter of fact, there was a big something missing because we didn't have the lender. We didn't have all that lender paperwork. We didn't have all those lender laws and lender rules. So if you're working with a cash buyer, it's however the attorney wants to handle it. There is no lender regulating settlement. So on page, for my book people, on or about 476, we're going to talk about 7 things that RESPA does to protect the consumer. So you have the nice little abbreviated version on 476. My digital people, we're under the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act title. So if you find that, you scroll down just a little bit and you can see those 7 things. So the Cliff's Notes, if you will, are on page 476. And then 476 through 480, we give a more expanded definition of those 7 things. So we're going to take those 7 things, and I'm sure there's more that RESPA does, but these are the 7 things that we're going to focus on. So the first thing that RESPA does to protect the consumer, they're going to offer a borrower credit for a yield spread premium. So hang on, let's talk first about what the heck a yield spread premium is. The lender may charge a premium for making a loan. They may charge the borrower a premium for making that loan, so the investor will have a higher yield. In lender speak, the yield is their rate of return. And the higher the yield, the more sellable the loan is on the secondary market. So one way that the lenders may have a higher loan or a higher sale, a sellable loan, is by increasing their yield. And if they charge the borrower for that yield spread, for that increased yield, then in a sense, the borrower is paying to benefit the lender, so they can sell their loan at a higher rate. Does that seem fair that the borrower pay for the lender to be able to sell their home at a higher rate? RESPA put an end to that. They said, if there's a fee paid for the lender to have a higher yield, then that needs to be credited back to the borrower at settlement. So if they're going to pay the premium to increase the lender's yield, then the lender needs to credit that to the borrower. I think that makes it a little bit more fair now. The second thing RESPA does to protect the consumer is they require, if the loan can be serviced, they require disclosure. If your loan can be serviced, that's just a fancy way of saying it can be sold. So if your lender is going to sell your loan to the secondary market, first off, whether or not the loan can be serviced has to be disclosed to the borrower before they originate the loan. Once the loan's originated, when the loan is serviced, both lenders need to notify the borrower, the one buying it and the one selling it. Most lenders service their loans. Some will keep them in-house. Some service them themselves, but most of them service as a way to replenish their funds so they can originate new loans. Guys, please understand, the lender doesn't come with free money. The money that they're giving you to buy a home, they had to get from somewhere. You know, they don't have a money tree out back that they can go pluck a $250,000 bill from and say, here you go. So they got to get the money from somewhere to originate new loans. So if the lender has a pocket full of money and they give you and you a loan, they have no more money to give more loans. So one way they can replenish their funds are to sell your loans, replenish their funds, so now they can give you and you a loan. That helps keep money flowing in the economy. And when we talk about money flowing in the economy, real estate plays a pretty big part in that, right? We got some high-end price tags on the products that we sell. So whether or not the loan can be serviced needs to be disclosed, and when it is, needs to be disclosed. The third thing RESPA may do to protect the consumer is put restrictions on the escrow account. When you originate a new loan, the lender, more than likely, is going to set up an escrow account for you. And part of your mortgage payment, your PITI, remember that TI is your taxes and your insurance. So part of your mortgage payment is 1/12 of this year's taxes and 1/12 of this year's insurance. And as you send that money in each month, they put that 1/12 in your escrow account. And when your tax bill comes due, the lender has that money to pay that bill on your behalf. When your homeowner's insurance bill comes due, the lender has the money to pay that bill on your behalf. So a couple restrictions RESPA puts on the lender when dealing with your escrow account. First off, they regulate how much they can collect each month. The lender's only allowed to collect 1/12 of this year's taxes. The lender can only collect 1/12 of this year's homeowner's insurance. Is there a really good chance that taxes could go up next year? Yeah. Is there a really good chance that homeowners insurance could go up next year? See, the lender can't say, well, I predict it's going to go up 15%, so I'm going to collect that much more, so I have that. They can only collect 1/12 of the current bill. My homeowner's on the call. You know, sometimes your mortgage payment goes up. It's not because of your principal and interest. Your principal and interest is the same for the life of the loan. What causes your payment to go up is increase in taxes, increase insurance. They can recalculate that 1/12. So how much they calculate each month is regulated by RESPA. The other thing that lenders are going to do, they're going to collect from the borrower at settlement kind of a cushion. They're going to collect some money, one, to fund the escrow account, to originate the escrow account, but two, to have a little bit of wiggle room. So when those taxes and insurance do go up next year, they can't charge you for it until it goes up, but they can have that cushion to still go ahead and pay those bills on your behalf. And the restriction on this is at settlement, the lender can only collect 2 months worth of this year's taxes and 2 months worth of this year homeowner's insurance to originate the escrow account and to have that cushion. Again, this is more math. We're going to see tomorrow when we do our closing disclosure, we're going to figure out that 2 months. So we know how much to charge the buyer. By the way, too, and we tend to get a little excited about this, so let me settle down, everybody down. When you pay your mortgage off, or when you sell your home, if there's any money left in your escrow, you're going to get that money back. The lender's not keeping it, they're not taking it, they're using it on your behalf. So if you pay off your mortgage and there's money in the escrow, they'll either credit it to you or you'll get a check a couple weeks later. So you're not losing that money, they're just using it to pay those bills on your behalf. I paid off my little condo, I think it was December 31st of 21. That was the very last thing I did in 21 is went to the bank and pay off my condo. There was a lot to celebrate that night, right? So we paid the condo off, it was a done deal. About 3 weeks later, I got a check from my lender. I was like, what did they do? Why are they sending me money? It was money I had in my escrow account. They were reimbursing me for that. That was a nice surprise, I'm not going to lie. I like walking out to the mailbox and finding free money. How about you guys? That was a good day. Questions so far? 3 things. The third thing the lender does, RESPA does to protect the consumer. Excuse me. Okay. let's take our last break of the day. So make it a good one. We'll come back 10 minutes. We'll say 3:41. So when we log out, and then we'll keep going and finish up the day and talk about what tomorrow is going to look like. Welcome back. So when we get done this last section, we wrap up at 5 o'clock today. You will know that you are 25% of the way through 302. So we're getting there, right? One day at a time. All right, so we're talking about these 7 things, breaking these 7 things down. Again, I'm almost certain there's more than 7 things that RESPA does to protect the consumer, but these are the most common ones, the ones we're discussing. The 4th thing that RESPA does to protect the consumer, and this is the one that hit us awfully close to home. They prohibit kickbacks and referral fees. Specifically, RESPA says settlement service providers cannot give or receive a kickback or referral fee for recommending services. So let's break this down. First off, who are settlement service providers? Well, they're anybody that provides a service during the settlement process. You and I are settlement service providers, the attorney, the lender, the home inspector, the surveyor. All those gears, they are providing a service. It used to be really good, you guys. It used to be you'd have lenders that say, for every borrower you send me, I'll give you a $25 Amazon gift card. We were sending all of our buyers to that lender, weren't we? Maybe they were the best lender on the block. Maybe they weren't. Guess what? I didn't care. I just wanted my $25 Amazon gift card. There were cases, I heard stories of maybe a lender, for example, saying, for every borrower you send me, I'm going to put your name in a hat. And at the end of the year, we're going to do a drawing for, y'all ready for this? An all expenses paid cruise. Why am I sending my buyer to this person? Because I want my name in the hat at least once. Is that fair to the consumer? Again, is it easy for me to get in the way and just send to the service because I'm going to get something out of it? So RESPA says that has to stop. We cannot give or receive anything for recommending services. I think that or receive thing is important. A settlement service provider may try to give you something. Can you accept it? No. Give or receive. RESPA says anything of value. We cannot give or receive $1. We cannot give or receive a donut. There isn't an amount that's okay. What, for example, home inspectors, maybe, I don't know, various settlement service providers, they want to meet you. They want to get in front of you because they do want you to send business to them. So one thing, for example, that they may do, we're starting to see this happen more and more and more. You may have a home inspector bring a box of donuts and a stack of business cards to your office. And what they can say is, we're going to put these back in the break room. Everybody help yourselves, take a business card. And if I can help, don't hesitate to call me. They can do that. What they can't do is show up with a box of donuts and say, you, and you can have a donut because you recommended me last month. Do you see the difference? If they're going to do something, it's going to be for the firm, whether or not you send them business or not. Now, obviously, why are they bringing a box of donuts to the firm? So we'll think of them and we'll call them when we need a home inspector, right? But if you send them business, the only thing they can do is pick up the phone and say, thank you. They've eliminated that. As much as it hurt, do we see why? Do we understand why you and I shouldn't benefit from this? It was easy to lose sight of what was important and focus on what's in it for me. So they squashed it. With that being said, they do still allow agent to agent referral fees. So when we have a buyer move into the Outer Banks, we send them to Kelly, of course. Can Kelly pay me an agent to agent referral fee for sending her a buyer? Absolutely, that's still allowed. None of us admitted to doing a commercial, myself included. I know very little about the commercial world. So if my best friend decides to buy a commercial property, it might be in my best interest to refer her to a commercial agent. Can I collect a referral fee from doing that? Absolutely. Agent to agent referral fees are still allowed. You just have to have an active license at that time to receive your referral fee. The other thing that they've kind of not really restricted, but just put a fine pin on it. If there's some kind of affiliated business arrangement that you're going to benefit from, we just have to disclose that to the consumer. This idea of one-stop shopping is gaining in popularity. So for example, you might have the real estate brokerage firm, the lender, and an attorney all under the same roof. We share space. We have an affiliated business arrangement. So if you work with a firm that shares a space with a lender and attorney, I can recommend that lender and attorney, but I can't make my buyer use that lender and attorney. They still have a choice. I still should be giving them 2 or 3 names of people I've used in the past. So if you do have that affiliated business arrangement and you are going to benefit it, such as sharing space, we just need to disclose that to the consumer. I think another good example of that, I used to work with a lady, real estate agent, and her husband was a home inspector. So when she worked with buyers, you too. So I'm not going to put you on the spot, Kelly, but when you work with buyers, do you look at your buyers and say, my husband's a home inspector, you have to use him? No. Do you tell your buyers he's a home inspector and they can choose to use him? You make it an option, right? Which there's no requirement. Same thing with her. He was one of her 2 or 3, but she had to disclose this home inspector is my husband, because doesn't she stand to benefit from him having that service? So as long as you disclose, when in doubt, disclose. Do you see that your buyers use your husband a lot? They trust you, so they feel compelled to trust your husband?
The majority of the time, but he has the business as far as that goes. So there's 2 or 3 of the different real estate or the different inspectors that they can choose from just that company.
Gotcha.
But then when I recommend him, I always recommend 2 other ones with it.
Perfect. Questions on prohibited kickbacks or referral fees? Don't give it, don't accept it. I'll tell you why in just a second. Why do you care? I'm getting it. The 5th thing that RESPA does to protect the consumer. We're going to talk about loan application in just a second. But after loan application, the lender shares this know before you owe booklet. So they send this booklet of information, talks about various things such as the contract to closing process, things that the borrower should consider, the importance of shopping around for various services, shopping around for the home inspector, for example. Just kind of walks them through the process. Again, RESPA requires it 3 days from loan application. I was very lucky. My husband and I bought this house in 2020. We're coming up on 3 years in this house. And it was interesting for me to go through the transaction as a buyer. I actually got to wear 2 hats. I was a buyer, and yes, I was my own agent. I get asked that a lot. Could you represent yourself? Well, of course. I'm not going to let somebody else get a commission for me buying a house. Are you kidding me? So I got to wear 2 hats in the transaction. And my buyer hat was very interesting for me to see that part of it. We went under contract, loan application was submitted. Now, they didn't actually put a book in my hand. Instead, what our lender did was supply me with an online version. I acknowledged receipt, so we knew I was in RESPA compliance. I think a lot of lenders now are using like a software that can identify when you log on, when you look at stuff, when you read stuff, so they have that trail of when you sign stuff. It's kind of like what a lot of our doctors are starting to do. They send you an email and say there's a message for you in your system. You need to log in and look at it, right? They're not going to send anything over email, but they're going to notify you that it's in your system. So lenders are picking up something like that for their paper trail. And that's where I accessed my Know Before You Owe booklet. The sixth thing that RESPA does to protect the consumer is they require a loan estimate within 3 days of loan application. Loan application is broken down for us on page 480 of the purple book. Loan application consists of the lender receiving 6 pieces of information. 3 pieces of information are about the people. The other 3 pieces of information are about the property. So we can only get our buyers so far through the loan process until we have an executed contract. So you can see from the people, we need their name, gross income, and SS number. And then from the property, we need the address, estimated value, and the requested loan amount. Once we have these 6 pieces, that's considered loan application, and that's when that 3-day clock. We're going to we'll talk more about the loan estimate in just a minute. And we're going to look at a sample loan estimate as well. So a little bit more to say about that. The last thing that RESPA does to protect the consumer is require a settlement statement. We no longer use HUD-1. HUD-1 is what we used to use. Again, it's all been consolidated, integrated, if you will. Today, we use a closing disclosure. And as a matter of fact, a big thing that came from TRID, it used to be prior to the housing market crash. It used to be that buyers and sellers information and numbers were all on the same document. So sellers could see the buyer's loan information, buyer could see the seller's payoff amounts. TRID said, that doesn't seem fair. Remember, bless you, remember who we're protecting in this transaction is the buyer. And TRID said, that's not fair. It's none of the seller's business what the buyer's loan information is. Really, the only thing the seller should care about is, can they get the loan? As far as the specifics, that's none of the seller's business. So today we'll learn, we keep buyers and sellers separate. We have 2 closing disclosure, 1 for each. Prior to TRID, it wasn't uncommon for buyers and sellers to sit at the same settlement meeting table at the same time. It was a hoopla where everybody was in the room together. Today, sellers go in the room and do their things, they leave, and then the buyer goes in the room and they do their things. We keep those separated today to protect the buyer. So the 7 things that RESPA does, 7 of the things that RESPA does to protect the consumer. Gee, Julie, what's the big deal? So I accept a donut. Who cares? Well, let's see what we got here. Penalties for violating RESPA. Criminal fines up to $10,000 per violation. How's that $25 Amazon gift card looking now? Didn't really benefit from that, did you? Imprisonment for up to a year. An injunction is a legal stop. So if the court or the commission issues you an injunction, your real estate practice is on hold while they're investigating this situation. We could be looking at civil lawsuits. Any monetary damages could be up to 3 times the amount. Again, understanding that RESPA is a lender law, but there are some things that apply to us too, such as the kickbacks and referral fees. So making sure we're in compliance. You know, guys, a lot of times when it comes to our buyers specifically, we're kind of the front line, right? Like they come to us first and then we talk to your lender, talk to your home inspector. But if we're hearing something, if you see something, you need to say something. If you hear something, you need to say something. So we're kind of acting as that front line, that communication between the lender and the borrower. If, as a real estate broker, you find yourself in trouble for violating RESPA penalties, don't not think that the real estate commission will get involved. And now, on top of everything else, you're also possibly facing disciplinary action for violating the licensed law of acting improper, fraudulent, or dishonest dealing. Questions on RESPA? What it does to protect the consumer? So switching gears, kind of, sort of, but not really. That's RESPA. So let's talk just a little bit more about TRID. Again, an acronym of acronyms. TRID is just the integration of TILA and RESPA. TILA is the Truth in Lending Act. RESPA is the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. TRID was born October 3rd, 2015. Don't need to know that date, but just think about that. 2015 was not that long ago, was it? What are we, 2023? TRID's gonna be 8 this year. Aw, little TRID. So it's really new in the big scheme of things, isn't it? So we're, working out these lender laws. TILA had their documents. RESPA had their documents. Again, the consumer, it was easy for them to look at these and say, these are duplicate documents. And so one thing that TRID did was they combined them. Today, we only have 2. We have the loan estimate and we have the closing disclosure. We've been saying it's the lender's responsibility to assure with compliance. But you and I need to be aware of these lender laws since we are involved in the transaction. We are very much a big part in the transaction. So being aware of what the lender goes through when dealing with TRID definitely can help in the transaction. Talking first specifically about the loan estimate. And there's information that the borrower can get from their loan estimate. Remember, this is coming out 3 days within loan application. For those of us that were around prior to the housing market crash, it still blows my mind when I think about how regulated it is today versus the free-for-all that it was before TRID. There were cases, you guys. I remember stories of agents going to settlement, sitting at the table, and their buyer finding out at the closing table what their estimated mortgage payment was going to be for the next 30 years. Does that make you want to breathe into a brown paper bag a little bit? I mean, seriously, you're getting ready to make a 30-year commitment and you have no idea what that payment's getting ready to be. TRID said, that's not fair. We need to give buyers time to look at this stuff. We need to give them the ability to look at this information. So this loan estimate comes out 3 days after the loan application, and some information that the borrower can get from the loan estimate. Well, the loan amount, what's the interest rate, or about what is the interest rate if we're not locked in yet? Does this loan product have a prepayment penalty? Is there going to be a balloon payment? A balloon payment. If you make your very last mortgage payment to the bank and you have a balance due, that balance due is your balloon payment. When you originate the loan that you're not going to pay the whole thing off with your last payment. When you originate the loan that you're going to have this balloon payment, this balance due. The loan estimate tells the consumer if there's a balloon payment or not. It's going to tell the consumer their estimated principal and interest, taxes, and insurance payment, their estimated mortgage payment, what are estimated borrower settlement charges, and what is their estimated cash to close. Always understand, this is an estimate. We're just within 3 days of loan application. We don't have final numbers yet. So the estimate is not going to be the final. Things can still change between now and the final closing disclosure. There are some regulations, though, on what can change and by how much. So some regulations. At any time that monies from the loan estimate are less than expected, that's okay. That's good news to the buyer, right? You tell them they got to bring 10,000 to closing, come to find out they only have to bring 9. That's good news. That's not a problem when they're less than expected. There is a problem when they're estimated more than expected. It's been my experience, a lot of lenders, can't blame them, overestimate a lot of these charges just to cover themselves. And so we have that good news at closing that the buyer doesn't have to bring as much as what we thought. So anytime the costs are less than expected, that's good news. There are some things that are not allowed to have any variations. Once they've been quoted, they've been quoted. Things that cannot change are lender fees. Once the lender quotes their fee to the borrower, that cannot change. Now, keep in mind, lender fees are generally a percentage of the loan. So if the loan amount changes, their fees are going to change. But what can't change is that percentage of. So if they quote a 3% loan origination fee, it's always going to be a 3% loan origination fee. Does that make sense? The loan amount may change, but that 3%, because that's what they were quoted. Also, no variations allowed for lender required services for which the borrower may not shop. For example, the appraisal. The lender orders the appraisal. The buyer gets to pay for it. It is the lender's appraisal. It's the lender's property. The buyer has no choice whatsoever who does the appraisal. So once we quote that appraisal fee, that cannot change. And then another thing we don't allow variations on is something called transfer taxes. My little asterisk is there because we don't have transfer taxes in North Carolina. Other states may have that. And if they do, once they're quoted that transfer tax, then that amount can't change. Probably the closest thing we have here is our excise tax. And in North Carolina, the seller pays it, so that doesn't affect the borrower. But just know other states may have that transfer tax. So allowable variations, no variations. And then we have a category of things where a 10% variation up or down is allowed, up or down from the estimated. So with 10% variation, recording fees, fees that the attorney charges, and then charges for third-party services that the borrower is allowed to shop for. So for example, the home inspection, the survey, the pest inspection. As we've been saying, the buyer can choose their own. 3 days of loan application, the lender may or may not know, you and I may or may not know who we're going to use for a home inspection. If we've scheduled it, we may not have gotten the bill yet. So again, it's an estimate, and we get a little bit of wiggle room here, as we understand all home inspectors are a little bit different. So changes from the estimate, because it's just that, it's just an estimate. So changes from the estimate can and do happen. Again, it's not meant to serve as the end all be all. It's just meant to act as an idea, give the buyer an idea of the numbers that they're looking at before they get to the settlement table. So when it comes to this loan estimate, what are we responsible for? Well, we need a general knowledge about TRID, how it works. That's why we're here. And then again, the best thing we can do is encourage our buyers to shop lenders, shop around, shop services. Questions on the loan estimate? I'm going to go off PowerPoint just for 1 second. In your manual, the hard copy, if you look at the end of this unit, it doesn't have a page number, but if you look at the end of unit 14, there's a sample loan estimate. For my non-book people, let me go to the end of unit 14. Faster if I do that way. There we go. And let's look at this sample loan estimate together.
In the blue book, I've got 494.
In the blue book, you're on 494. Thank you. The purple book, it is not labeled. It's not a page number, but it's after 493. So in the purple book, it's 494 as well. It just doesn't have a number in the purple. Give me a daggone page number. So what we're looking at is, again, the same thing you have in your book, but this is just a sample loan estimate. You can see we got the borrowers, the applicant's information, what property sales price, what's the term of the loan. This is a 30-year conventional loan. Interest rate lock has happened, so we know our interest rate. There's our loan amount. Can this amount increase after closing? Yes or no? So the loan amount, interest rate, there's our monthly principal and interest payment. The borrower knows, as somebody that was around prior to TRID, this always blows my mind. Within 3 days of loan application, their estimated principal and interest payment is going to be $761.78. I can't stress how huge this is, how much this really does protect the consumer by educating the consumer about their loan. Is there a pre-made payment penalty? Yes or no? Is there a balloon payment? Yes or no? Then we have our projected payment. So there's our estimated principal and interest, our estimated insurance, mortgage insurance, PMI, and our estimated escrow account. This is our taxes and insurance. It's going to go in the escrow. Again, this is just an estimate. Maybe we've secured homeowners insurance by this point, maybe we haven't. So the best we can do is offer an estimate. We're projecting that your estimated total monthly payment, PITI, is going to be $1,050. And then when we scroll down at the bottom of page 1, there's the borrower's estimated cash to close. It's projected when you buy this house, how much are you going to have to bring to the attorney's office? $16,054. Guys, this is huge. This gives the buyer a chance to look at that number, make sure they're okay with that number. Do I have that kind of money, right? This gives them the opportunity to learn about their loan and really understand what's happening with it, how it's working before they originate it. The next page, and I'll let you guys look at this more closely if you wish. But the next page, we don't just throw $16,054 closing costs at them. This next page actually tells the borrower the breakdown of the $16,054. So this page is all about tallying everything up, all their costs, closing costs, that kind of thing, and explaining where that $16,054 came from. And then the third page you can see is just a little bit more information about the loan. So within 3 days of loan application, RESPA tells the lender, we have got to have this in the borrower's hand so they can take everything into consideration as they're originating, going through this process and originating this loan. Is this better than finding out when you get to settlement? You better believe it. I heard stories, horror stories. Agents were having to in some cases, follow their buyers to the bank after settlement to get their money because they didn't know that amount beforehand. Is that not wild? Sign this paperwork, go to the bank and get me X amount. That's not fair to the consumer. And that's what RESPA is all about, is protecting them. I can't think of a better way to protect somebody than to educate them. And so we're going to educate them about their loan, about that 30-year commitment, 15-year, 10-year, whatever, that commitment they're getting ready to make to the lender. Questions or comments on RESPA? Nope. Loan estimate or RESPA. Either one. So if we have the loan estimate within 3 days of loan application. So now let's fast forward through the whole process. We are now a few days away from settlement. So now we have the other document that comes into play, which is our closing disclosure. Today, we have two, one for the buyer, one for the seller. Again, RESPA does not care if the buyer sees the seller's numbers. What RESPA cares about is that the seller doesn't see the buyer's numbers. That's who we're protecting in this transaction. So two closing disclosures. The attorney is instructed, by the way, the attorney prepares these closing disclosures. The lender doesn't, but the attorney prepares them under instructions by the lender. So the lender is going to instruct the attorney to prepare two, one for the buyer, one for the seller. TRID only applies if a lender's involved. Like we said, if it's a cash buyer, TRID's not around. It's a lender law. Understanding that the consumer in this transaction, the one we are protecting in this transaction is the borrower. That is our buyer. The other important point to understand is that any money that changes hands as a part of this transaction has got to appear on the closing disclosure. Even if a third party is going to pay it, it still has to appear on this closing disclosure. Let's keep in mind, first off, the parties to this transaction are whom? Who are the parties to the transaction? I see mouths move. Buyer and seller. Everybody else is a third party. You and I are a third party, the lender, the appraiser, everybody else is a third party. So when we talk about any money that changes hands, let's say you're a buyer's agent, you've got your buyers under contract, they're first-time home buyers, they're a young couple, fresh out of college, and they're out buying their new home. We go under contract. The buyers want to schedule another showing with you so they can show this home to mom and dad. So you schedule a time, we all meet at the house, we go inside, mom and dad are oohing and on. And mom and dad, we're standing in the living room, and mom and dad say, "We are so proud of you. And as a matter of fact, to show you how proud we are, we would like to pay for your home inspection." Can mom and dad pay for the home inspection? Can they? Sure, no problem. Are mom and dad a third party? Yeah. Is the home inspector part of this transaction? Yeah. So even though mom and dad are paying the home inspection, that transaction has got to appear on the closing disclosure. We have a column that says money's paid by third parties. So it's got to appear, all monies that change hands as a part of this transaction has to appear on the closing disclosure. We're going to learn tomorrow that things like the appraisal are paid up front. The appraiser is not going to go do their thing until they've been paid. Was the appraisal part of this transaction? Yeah. So even though they've already been paid, that fee still has to show up on the closing disclosure. RESPA tries to keep things easy for us, and we appreciate that. The loan estimate is due within 3 days of loan application. Now let's fast forward to the closing disclosure. And there's a rule that says the lender has to deliver the borrower CD to the borrower no less than 3 business days prior to settlement. And we're going to talk about what's a business day, what's considered a business day. The delivery of the lender's closing disclosure to the borrower, first off, has to be directly from the lender to the borrower. This is one place where you and I cannot be involved in this communication. That disclosure, that CD, comes directly from the lender to the borrower. Again, they're going to send them an email and say, there's an important document in your file. You need to log on, look at it, and e-sign, acknowledge receipt. So we know we're in that 3-day compliance. When we start talking about what's a business day, in RESPA world and TRID world, closing disclosure world, Saturday counts. So when we talk about what is a business day, Sundays do not count. Major holidays do not count. Saturday does. And in TRID world, when we count days, we always count day one as the day after receipt. So today's Saturday. Day one is not Sunday because Sunday's not a day in TRID world. So day one would be Monday. Day two would be Tuesday. Day three would be Wednesday. If your borrower receives their closing disclosure today, sign off on it today, there is no possible way for us to close before Wednesday. That 3-day count always starts the day after receipt. If for some reason we were supposed to close on Tuesday and the borrower doesn't get their CD until today, we have to delay closing until Wednesday. Mark my words. You will have a closing delayed because of this 3-day rule. It's just going to happen. When I'm working with buyers and sellers, you guys, I always tell them to have a plan B, because I can't guarantee you we're going to close on time for whatever reason. We're all going to work really hard to make this happen, but I can't make guarantees. So please have a plan B. I do not want anybody sleeping in the U-Haul truck tonight because we didn't get to closing. So always have them have a plan B. So this 3-day rule, 3 days prior to settlement, that 3-day rule applies if it's personally delivered. When we say personal delivery, the lender either actually hands it to them or they use that software where they acknowledge that they've received it. If we don't use that software, if we don't have personal delivery, TRID says we need to allow for 6 days. So if they're going to snail mail it, for example, again, most lenders use that software unless you're using an archaic lender or maybe the borrower doesn't have an email. But if we can't personal delivery or verify that they've received it, then we have to allow for 6 days. And what counts as a business day? Sunday and national holidays do not count. So in TRID world, Saturday is a business day. Like we said, day one is always the day after receipt. We were specifically, you don't need to know this, but just FYI, what does TRID consider a business day? You can see there most of our federal holidays, not all of them, but most of them. So if Monday's Christmas, Sunday wouldn't count, Monday wouldn't count, day one would be Tuesday, Wednesday would be 2, Thursday would be 3, which means we can't close before Thursday. As a buyer's agent, this is one place we can help keep those gears turning. We can have a conversation with our buyer the week of closing, right? We can look at our buyer and we can say, you're going to get a very important email from the lender. When you get that, I need you to stop, acknowledge it, and sign off on it. Because if you get it today and you don't sign off on it until tomorrow, day one's going to be the day after that, the day after receipt. So have that conversation with your buyers as we get closer and closer to closing so they can be on the lookout so they don't delay their own closing. That happens where buyers delay their own closings. Help keep those gears turning. Questions about that? Generally in practice, what happens once the lender sends this closing disclosure to the borrower, that 3 days, the borrower's not going to the bank yet. They're reviewing the CD from the lender. Once they review that, then the lender and the attorney are going to get together and kind of communicate, put the finishing touches on things. The attorney then is going to prepare the closing disclosure. The attorney is going to send that to us. That's what we see, and that's what we review for accuracy. Most of the time it's awfully close. It's not off by much at all. But in the event, tell your buyers, don't go to the bank until you've talked to me, because we want to make sure you've reviewed the CD from the attorney. You are the one that's going to call them and say, go to the bank, get me a cashier's check or do a wire transfer for X amount. By this point, we usually are a day away from closing. They've seen their final CD. They're just waiting on us to get our hands on it, review it, so they can go to the bank to get that money. One of the last closings I've done in my sales transaction was my husband's niece and her nephew. And again, it was really helpful for me to be close to those buyers because I could see some inside things that as a buyer's agent, we don't always see. And she shared with me when they got their closing disclosure from the lender sent an email saying, log into your system and look at the closing disclosure and sign off on it. And then she had like big, bold, red, yellow highlighted. It'd be really hard to miss. Do not go to the bank until you've talked to your real estate agent. And I was like, thank you, lender. I really, really, really like that. It helped with that communication. With the closing disclosure, this is the lender responsibility to comply with TRID. It's up to the lender whether or not they issue separate CDs, which they're going to. And when it comes to that closing disclosure 3-day rule, again, you and I don't get involved in that communication. The lender can't send it to us and say, forward this on to your buyer. That's one place that you and I, one point of communication that you and I are not involved. That delivery is actually from the borrower. I'm sorry, from the lender straight to the borrower. Sometimes, once that completed closing disclosure is sent, sometimes things change. Maybe once the agent reviews it, they find a mistake. Mistakes happen. I wish I could stand here and tell you that those things are always perfect and they're never ever wrong. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm not going to do it. Mistakes happen. The thinking is the more sets of eyes on these closing disclosures, the better chance for accuracy that we have. So when we find an error, when we find a mistake, we have a duty to report those errors to the attorney, to the lender, so they can correct them. They'll correct it and they'll issue a new closing disclosure. There's only a handful of mistakes, 3 specifically, not mistakes, 3 changes that are going to require a new CD and a new 3 business day count. So we've issued the CD and then we've changed, either we've increased the APR, there's been a change in the loan product. This is another brown paper bag moment. When we talk about a change in the loan product, remember we're like 3 days away from settlement, and all of a sudden the buyer decides they want to switch from, I don't know, conventional to FHA. Why would they do that 3 days prior to settlement? I don't know. But if they do, we've changed the loan product. Or if there's an addition of a prepayment penalty. These 3 things, and only these 3 things, will require a new CD with a new 3-day count. Is closing going to be delayed at this point? Probably. Any other change will not require the new 3-day count. These are the only things that require the new 3-day count. So if you have changes that occur, they'll issue a new CD. So you find a mistake. Maybe there was a calculation that was wrong. Maybe you looked at the closing disclosure and thought, oh my gosh, I forgot to send in the home inspector's invoice. Silly me. Send it to the attorney. They'll update the CD. You're not going to delay closing. They're not going to require a new 3-day count. And then the other category of change that could happen are things that happen after closing. Sometimes, every once in a while, maybe taxes are figured wrong or something, and so they'll issue a credit to one party. Again, that would be a nice phone call to get after you buy a house, right? And then you get the phone call, we overcharged you, we got a check for you to come by and pick up. So sometimes they need to correct things. I think other changes after post consummation are, just grammatical errors. Maybe somebody's name is misspelled or the address is wrong. Humans prepare these things. So humans, we make mistakes. Understanding too that closing disclosures are simply that. Settlement statements are one thing, closing disclosures are disclosures. One of the big difference in the closing disclosure and the settlement statement, the closing disclosure doesn't authorize the attorney to disperse funds after settlement. So it's not uncommon to see both a settlement statement and a closing disclosure. The ALTA, or the American Land Title Association, is the most commonly used settlement statement, but it's not the only one available. It's just the one that we see the most often. Obviously, the numbers on the settlement statement need to make sure they all match the numbers in the closing disclosure. Again, one's disclosing the information, the other one is authorizing payment. We'll look at samples of both in just 1 second. If TRID's not around, if a lender's not involved, we're not going to issue closing disclosures. The attorney's probably just going to deal with the ALTA. They're probably just going to deal with the settlement statement. But again, if TRID's not around, if the lender's not around, the attorney can pretty much handle it whatever they want to, however they want to. So let's bring this home for us. When it comes to these closing disclosures, what are we responsible for? Well, we have a duty to make sure that our buyer receives an accurate closing disclosure. We have a duty to make sure that their bottom line, their bottom dollar, how much do you have to bring to closing, is accurate. I'm not responsible for verifying all of the numbers on the closing disclosure, but I am responsible for verifying those numbers of which I should have knowledge. So let's talk about what numbers I should have knowledge. For example, do I not know the purchase price? Do I know the due diligence amount, the earnest money deposit, any seller paid closing costs? Where am I getting that? How do I know that? How can I verify that those numbers are right when I'm reviewing the closing disclosure?
Offer to purchase.
Yeah. When you get the CD from the attorney, go back to your transaction file and pull out the contract. Were there any amendments to the contract? Did we renegotiate any of those amounts? Make sure those amounts are right. As we've talked about the home inspector, they send you the invoice for you to send it to the attorney. Do you know the amount of that home inspection? If you've received the invoice, do you know what they're charging? Sure. So I can verify that is right. If you never get the invoice, you can't verify that. So we can verify those if we've received them. By the time I'm done with you guys tomorrow, I'll have you prorating taxes. I'll have you calculating interim interest. All sorts of fun things we get to do tomorrow. So we'll be able to actually, when that CD comes in from the attorney, we're going to pick our calculators up and help review it for accuracy. Let's see, we owe our buyers old car. Who remembers what that A in old car is? Seeing mouths move. I love it. I see wheels, hamsters literally running right now. It's like singing the alphabet or something. So what is that A in old car? That's accounting. That's making sure that our buyers and sellers numbers are accurate. And isn't a big number in the transaction how much the buyer owes and how much the seller is going to get? So helping them verify those numbers. When you find a mistake, we have got to report it. We've got to contact the attorney. We've got to contact the lender. You don't need to be nasty about it, but just pick up the phone and say, I was reviewing our closing disclosure and I found that taxes were wrong or the home inspection was missing. Y'all want to know what I discovered on one of my closing disclosures one day I was reviewing it? Let me tell you first off who I was. I was the listing agent. I represented the seller. What's something that the seller pays for that's very important to me?
Commission.
My money. And as the listing agent, I was reviewing the seller CD, and you know what was missing? Not even wrong, flat out missing. The buyer's agent was Mike. I called the attorney and I said, or the paralegal, and I said, yeah, Mike and I want to get paid. And she said, and I quote, whoopsie. Are you kidding me? I mean, okay, here we go. What all the what ifs? What if I hadn't caught that? We went to closing. What if? My seller was a very nice lady. I'd really like to think that she would have happily sat down and whipped out her checkbook and wrote a check to the firm and I. If not, I don't know, maybe the firm would have to take her to court. I mean, all the what ifs, right? I don't know what could have happened because I reviewed it and I caught it before settlement. That will fix you. You guys going to call and report if your commission's wrong? You better believe it. We need to have that same mentality when any number is wrong. Home inspection, whatever number on that closing disclosure is not accurate. As we mentioned, I can't verify all of the information. So what are some things that I may not be privy to? I may not have knowledge of. Well, for example, I wasn't privy to the conversation between the lender and the borrower when the lender quoted their fees. So I don't know what the lender charged the borrower. I can't verify that information. However, what I can do is make sure it looks normal. Once you guys do this a few times, you're going to see lender charges, or there's a range. And if anything looks obscure or abnormal, our little red flag should go up to prompt us to call the lender and ask some questions. You're charging my guys 25% of the sales price? That doesn't seem right. Explain that to me. You guys with me? So we still got to look at it and make sure our little red flag doesn't go up, but I can't verify it. Notifying the lender of any expenses paid for by third parties. So again, mom and dad paying for the home inspection. We're the front line. So if we hear that conversation go down between mom, dad, and the borrower, then we need to make sure that we're notifying the lender so they can add it. When you find a mistake, failure to report. This is about the time that we like to get shy all of a sudden. You find a mistake, and the last thing you want to do is pick up the phone and call the attorney and say you're wrong. And we think we're going to get shy. But this is not the time to get shy. Failure to report these errors or omissions is going to be considered willful failure to disclose material facts. It's a violation of our agency duties. We violated Old Car. Again, if you see something, say something. Make sure you're reviewing those things and helping them be accurate. Listing agents, there's not going to be a CD from the lender, obviously, because the relationships between the buyer and the lender. Bless you. All of y'all are sneezing. What's going on over there today? I'm glad we're on Zoom. There's not going to be communication from the lender to the seller. So the seller's closing disclosure will just come from the attorney. The attorney will send it to the listing agent like the day or two before settlement. There are no 3-day rules or anything like that. But we will have the opportunity to review that for our sellers, on behalf of our sellers as well. So also, let's see, my hard book people, again, the loan estimate in my purple book Starts after page 494. If you skip ahead 3 pages, we have our sample closing disclosure. My digital people, you have it down here. And we'll open it so we can all see it together. So we looked at a sample loan estimate. So now here we are looking at our sample closing disclosure. Again, closing information, the date of closing, who the settlement agent is, etc., who's the borrower, the seller, and the lender, and then the loan information. Here's our loan amount, interest rate, monthly principal and interest. We could actually compare the loan estimate to the closing disclosure. If you want to do that in your hard book, it's like 3 pages back. Prepayment penalty, balloon penalty. When we looked at the loan estimate, we saw our monthly payment was $1,050. Now we're at the closing disclosure and it's $1,050.26. Is anybody going to get excited over 26 cents? Probably not. Again, that's the difference in going from the estimate to the actual. It's pretty right on right there, isn't it? Our estimated taxes and insurance did come up a little bit, but where do we see? Oh, what the difference, what brought it up? We didn't have HOA dues at the loan estimate. So once we added those HOA dues, then that brought that up a little bit. Let's see, at the loan estimate, we were told what? $206, and now it's up $356.13. So we've not only secured our homeowners insurance and know now exactly how much it is, but we also added HOA dues. And then we have our closing costs. They were told they had to bring $16,054 at the loan estimate. Now fast forward to closing, and how much do they have to bring? Now they only have to bring $14,147.26. Isn't that good news to your buyer? That's about $1,500 they can use to like move or paint or, you know, whatever it is that they need to do. So again, my experience, lenders tend to overestimate to protect themselves, but also it turns out to be good news for the buyer. As long as these numbers come down, that's always okay. The problem would be if the final CD was more than the $16,054 that they were quoted. This page is the breakdown of the buyers and sellers closing costs. This is page 1 of the closing disclosure that we're going to spend more time on tomorrow, most of tomorrow on. So I'm not going to take the time to look at this now, knowing that we're going to be all over this tomorrow, along with page 2. So these are the 2 pages of the closing disclosure. The one thing I do want to point out on the closing disclosure, I like this a whole lot for the borrower. They actually give them a side-by-side comparison. This is your loan estimate. This is your final. And did this amount change? Is this easy for the consumer to look at real quick and compare their numbers? It's about helping them understand that 30-year commitment, sharing these numbers, the breakdown of the numbers, educating them about the loan that they're getting. And then the last couple pages, again, are just information about the loan. We saw in the loan estimate. And then you have contact information. So who's the lender, who are the real estate agents, who are the settlement agent, etc. So sample closing disclosure. The other thing I wanted to show you. Here it is. We mentioned the closing disclosure. And we also mentioned the ALTA, the settlement statement. So as a sample ALTA, as you can see, this is actually from a transaction I had. So I blacked out the sensitive information to protect the innocent. So this is a settlement statement from one of my closings, 2017. So we have the borrower's contact information, And then we can see their numbers, breakdown of the borrower's debits and the borrower's credits. Again, the numbers in the settlement statement should match those in the closing disclosure. They just do two different things. So break it down to the end of settlement. And then we have acknowledgement and statement of receipts and disbursements made from my account on my behalf. So the settlement statement is what authorizes the attorney to pay everybody when this transaction is complete. You and I get paid, the lender, the attorney, everybody with their standing there with their hand out, waiting to get paid. Reviewing this as well, making sure it all matches. By the way, y'all seeing this? This was a fun buyer. Her debits and her credits matched. How much does that mean my buyer had to bring to closing? Yeah, that's a big fat zero right there, isn't it? How did that happen? She was a VA buyer. This was a really good day for her because she was told a little bit. We saw that thing this morning and she was like, are you kidding me? I was like, that's what the lender says. Very happy buyer. One of those products that's available to VAs and is very rewarding to see that work out. A well-deserved, well-deserved. Questions? Comments on anything at all? We've covered a lot today, yes? Not much new, though. Maybe just expanded on from what you learned. Hopefully giving you a better understanding, which is what this is all about, giving you a better understanding of how we're gonna handle these contracts. So let's look. We're done with that. And then I don't really want to start this next section tonight just because we're spending all our time. Don't go anywhere just yet. Don't log out. I'm not done with you yet. But I do want to kind of talk about what tomorrow is going to look like so we can be prepared. Please bring your calculator tomorrow. If you haven't been calculator shopping, you can use the calculator on your phone tomorrow until you get a calculator, but just make sure you get a calculator soon if you don't have one so you can use it for your test. So bring some kind of calculator tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to work through the closing disclosure, the settlement statement math. So do you guys, okay, this is what I need you guys to do. If you do not have the ability to print, I need you to reach out to Lane or I like tonight and let us know. Because for your exam, you guys can, and I need you to bring a blank closing disclosure. I will allow you to use a blank closing disclosure for your exam. I'll verify that it's blank before the test. If you do not have the ability to print, either at home or at your office, please reach out to Lane or I tonight so we can make arrangements to get you one of these for your test. Everybody good so far? Do not wait until next Sunday morning. I can't help you then. Reach out to me tonight if you can't print. If you can print tonight, you may want to print one of these blank closing disclosures off because we will go through this tomorrow. I think it's helpful if you have it sitting in front of you. Now you'll look at my screen and I'll have it pulled up. But if you do have the ability to print tonight, please do so you can fill it in with me. You can work it with me. So I'm in the online learning system and we are in the section 4 material. And this is the blank closing disclosure. So if you can print one tonight, I got practice for you guys. I'm going to encourage you guys to practice this thing over the week. This is why I rearranged the class and put this tomorrow to give you guys time. So any practice you want to do, you have the blank CD right here in section 4. You can either print it or you can, I mean, this thing's interactive. So you can, once you download it and save it to your computer, why can't I do it? There we go. So you can actually type right in it if you like don't want to waste all that paper when you're doing that practice. So the only one you need is for the test on Sunday. So tomorrow we'll look at our CD. We're going to do the in-class CD together. Talk ourselves through that step by step. And then I'll have a recommended homework assignment for you guys. I can't make it mandatory. The Real Estate Commission doesn't make it mandatory, so I can't. But what I can do is highly recommend. I'll give you a homework assignment and we'll talk about it in class next weekend. That'll give us an opportunity to review it before your test to get ready. But again, I'll give that to you guys ahead of time so you can look at it. I do think the more of these you do, the better you're going to get. So whatever we need to do to practice to help you guys get through the test. So we'll talk about that homework assignment tomorrow as well. Make sure we're all on the same page there. Is that good? Any questions? Anything? Well, if you guys are good, I'm good. Again, I don't want to start something new just to stop it and then have to refresh tomorrow. So y'all want to boogie out a little early? Don't party tonight. I need you here at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow doing math. So no parties. Lay low tonight. We'll get through this tomorrow. We'll walk through this step by step. I hope you guys have a great night. And I will see y'all in the morning, 9 a.m. sharp.
Thank you.
Thank you.